Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Oh, great. Hey, Sean. Okay, it looks like we have 7 of us here. My count is right.
Yes, that would be correct, Vince. I'm expecting Stephanie and Caroline a little later.
Oh, okay. And 7 a quorum, Donna?
We do have a quorum.
Okay, great. So we'll get started here. Okay, adjust this so you can see my face. Okay, well, welcome everyone to the September 1st meeting of the Missoula Consolidated Planning Board. As we've been doing for quite a while now, this will be a virtual public meeting. And yeah, so we're holding this meeting virtually, so we're going to do public comment a little differently than we did in the past. It will be a live call-in phone line. And so for folks who are calling in, it will work just like a radio show or making a pledge during a telethon. And before we take any votes or call for public comment, we'll give about 5 minutes for folks to go to the phone and to call to comment on that item. There is about a 30-second delay between the public feed that people view via YouTube and the Zoom meeting here. So that's the reason for giving 5 minutes for folks to go to the phone. And so the numbers to call in for people who are listening out there are 213-338-8477 or 877-853-5257, which is toll free. And the meeting ID is 960-049-3694. Okay, and once you're on the line, you will be on hold until it's your turn to comment, and our meeting moderator will let you know when you join the meeting and when it's time for you to make comments. Okay, so with that, I think we'll get started here. First thing on the agenda here is a roll call. Donna, could you please do the roll call?
Certainly. Andy Mefford's absent. Peter Benson.
Here.
Peter Benson's present. Sean McCoy.
Here.
Sean McCoy is present. Stephanie Potts will be in about an hour. Dave Loomis.
Here.
Dave Loomis is present. Josh Schrader.
Here.
Josh Schrader is present. Caroline Lauer, I expect shortly. Neva Hassanen. Present. Neva Hassanen's present. Shane Morrissey.
Present.
Shane Morrissey's present. Vince Caristo.
Present.
Vince Caristo is present. Mr. Chair, I have 5 members and 2 alternates present. Would you like to appoint both alternates as regular voting members tonight?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to public comment on items that are not on tonight's agenda. At this time, if anyone out there is listening would like to call in to give comment on any item at all that's not on tonight's agenda, this would be the time. So at this point, we'll give a few minutes for people to call in. We've put the phone numbers up on the screen with the information to connect with us. And with that, I will go on silent and give time for people to call in. Okay, I think that should be enough time just to do a last call here. Is there anyone waiting in the waiting room right now who's waiting to speak?
Excuse me, Vince, this is Donna. Could we go back to the approval of the minutes?
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. We skipped an item. So we're finished with public comment. No one has commented. We'll go back to approving the minutes from the August 18th meeting from 2 weeks ago. We have a very nice and detailed set of minutes. Are there any revisions or questions the planning board members would like to make before approving the minutes? Okay, seeing none, I'll call for a motion to approve the minutes from August 18th.
So moved.
Moved by Shane. Is there a second? Going once.
I'll second it.
Okay, thank you, Joshua. Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
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 All opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Okay. Moving on now to the next item is staff announcements. So Karen Hughes, if you're there and willing and able to maybe give the planning board a refresher on email communication and the rules and best practices around that.
Sure. So this is Karen Hughes from Missoula County Community and Planning Services. And the way this was kind of sparked was we received some public comments on an item from a previous agenda. And there was I think there was an interest expressed to maybe want to talk it over, and which is great. That's what we like, is that you receive comments and you want to talk over what you've received. And we just talked about the possibility that we really need to pay close attention to those open meeting laws. The right to participate and the right to know is really strong in the Montana Constitution. And the use of email communication essentially could be construed as constituting a meeting. And so really anytime there's something that the board wants to talk over, you don't need to bring it up in email, you just need to bring it to the meeting. And there's a time in the meeting for you to put out their comments that individual board members have. At the end of the meeting, I think it's item 11 on your standard agenda, is time you can raise issues that you want to talk about. And that's the best way that you can all participate, and the public who might have the similar interests can can listen to your conversation and participate in it should they wish. And pretty much any time that it's an item of significant public interest, if it's an item of interest to you, then you can bet it's an item of interest to someone else. So that was kind of the key things that I wanted to talk about, just that it's really important to always remember that the right to participate is so strong in Montana laws and in the Constitution that really avoiding all use of email communications, and it's actually in your bylaws that electronic communications like email are really only to be used for logistical, like setting up meeting dates, times, polling, those sorts of things, to avoid talking about what you might want to talk about or your response to something that you receive, to keep that for your meeting. That's what your meetings are for. And so it's great to have an opportunity to kind of put that out there and have a periodic reminder, because it's so easy. We all use email. It's easy to fall into the habit of responding when you see something come through, but just try and remember for planning board to keep it to your meeting, to just hold on to it and make sure you remember to bring it up at your regular meetings. That's all. If you have any questions, let me know.
Thank you, Karen. Yeah, it's definitely a unconventional set of rules, for particularly in this day and age, but it's definitely important given the Montana's open meeting laws. Are there any questions about this? Peter.
Well, one of the problems that we've had with these rules and with the way we schedule our meetings is that it's difficult to ask the board to consider something ahead of time. To do, to say, hey, I think this is important. I'd like to discuss it. Here's some background information on it. Can we discuss it next time? And compounded by the fact that we end up the time we have allowed to discuss it is at the end of our meeting when we're all, it's 10 o'clock, we're tired. I'm not trying to get around the challenge of this, but in effect, for me, it quashes our ability to discuss things. For impromptu discussion, it works great. For more carefully considered issues that we as a board would like to address, it makes it more difficult. And I'm not sure how we get around that.
I don't think you can. I mean, I think that's kind of the point, I guess, in a way, right? That anything that's worth us deliberating and needs to be public. So I don't know how you could get around that, Peter. Maybe I'm not understanding what you're asking. Or are you saying like maybe we would do something like have some subcommittee meetings that would be announced and address topics? We tried that, I think, and that would be one way to try to do that again or something. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, it is. I think it's worth considering that we have what this builds up in my experience over the last 2 years has been that the board it's hard for us to address our own agenda. I agree with you. Yes, we have to make this public. I'm not arguing that we should, in fact, keep things from the public in any way. I think we have to find ways to include the public in this. But I'd like to hear, as we think about it, I mean, and make this work, I really think we need to pay attention to what our agenda is, how we bring up issues that we can consider carefully. Maybe we just have to say, it's going to have to take time. It has to be brought up at the meeting. It has to be allocated and the resources directed to it. And then we come back to it at a later time. And that we consider any of these issues as 3-month or 4-month issues and not something we can resolve in a meeting or two.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably a good strategy. And I would add that, I'm pretty sure that if you had a subcommittee, which is also subject to the open meeting laws, of course,
right?
So they have to, meet and have minutes and stuff like that. But still, a subcommittee could work on something and could submit a report or a proposal to the planning board to consider, and that can be attached to your agenda. So that the whole board receives it. You wait to talk about it until you're meeting it, until you get to that agenda item, right? And so that would be something like a committee report. And then if the board wants to take some sort of action, once you kind of had a report or had an item come up in a planning board member comment that the board wants to do something with, then you put it into your business. You make it a new business item to start with. So it does take time. Public process is not meant for the faint of heart. It's a bit of a grind, but that's how you move it through and allow, especially in the virtual meeting format where people aren't necessarily tuning in. It might take them a couple meetings to realize the planning board's discussing something that's of interest to them. So it's only fair to give them that time to kind of sign in should members of the public want to, and should board members want to. You can use your agendas and the tools that we have to help get that on an agenda, put information out there for people to consider, come back to it in discussions and move it to the next agenda as an action item. Those are all tools you can use, and we're happy to help you with that, including helping you set up subcommittee meetings that are open to the public. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point is well taken, Peter, because I've been feeling like, we have to make decisions on very particular projects or whatever, or plans, and the bigger sometimes I worry we're missing the bigger picture. We talk about the bigger picture together when we talk about those projects, but I agree that I don't know if I have the time or bandwidth, but I agree that there's a need for some of that conversation, especially as our agendas have been so full lately and long. And
so I guess
John, you've had your hand up.
An item.
Yeah. I guess I've got one thought to Peter's question, and then I have a question for Karen. I noticed with this most recent, secondary information that came in later this week about the Huron's Landing subdivision, looking at the city council's schedule, they have first readings and second readings in regards to some things. And I wonder if that wouldn't be something. Granted, it slows that process down, right? But wouldn't be appropriate for us as well, so that we could get a presentation, look at something, think about it, come back after a pause. I mean, and it might mean more meetings and blah, 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 but that might be one way to address, Peter's thoughts. And I think a concern that I share as well. And then Karen, I had a question for you, just as far as if there's any rules governing, so when we got that public comment after the Huron's Landing meeting, and I read through those, I sent a personal email to the woman who addressed that, as an individual. And I'm curious if there's any rules about that around the board. I didn't claim to be part of the board, but I sent her an email being like, hey, if you're asking what you think you should do, I would take this to the city council. That would be what I would do. But I was curious when I was writing that email if I was breaking a rule or if I was doing something that I shouldn't be doing. And, I want to know if that's, I want to, check that concern.
Yeah, I think the biggest concern is that individual board members can't represent their perspective on behalf of the board without the board backing it up. It's kind of the big rule of thumb for board members. Just so you know, anytime we receive comments on any development proposal, the city and the county both do this, I know. Comments come in after hearings happen, but before the next hearing, and those comments all get funneled to the next hearing. So the city will have provided the comments that were sent to the planning board late. They will provide them to the city council. So it's not like that information, just because it was directed to the planning board, it goes to the next consideration. In terms of the procedural stuff for the city, they have a very particular process for adopting ordinances that requires those readings. That's different than what the planning board's procedures are. So that's kind of you don't have the same procedural requirements that they do. That's and you won't, because you're not adopting rules. You're providing recommendations. If you have a subdivision or a zoning that sometimes significant information comes in and staff has to do some additional research, or the board just can't make a recommendation, well, there's a couple of options. One is talking with the staff, working through that with the staff, whatever the issue is. It is, occasionally hearings have been held open. Usually it has to do with the fact that the board has requested changes that make it so different that the staff brings them new findings or a new kind of recommendation that is substantively different than what was originally put forward. And so allowing a hearing to continue to a future date is a way to deal with that. but I would definitely, usually that's something that the board would work through with the case planners. To some of these projects, especially subdivisions, are under legal mandated timelines, and so we do have to kind of stay within those timeframes as well. The developer has, and actually the jurisdictions have to abide by those timelines or can be penalized. So that's just something to be aware of. So definitely work with whoever the case planner is if you're contemplating that it's so difficult to work through that you need more time. Work through it with the case planner.
If I may, I have one other question for Karen. So the Remington Flats subdivision, which maybe is a city thing, but is coming up soon, and it is another one that is in the Mullen area plan. And I had understood from our earlier calendar that you provided in July that the Mullen area plan was going to be considered on September 15th, but it appears to have been bumped out because of Remington Flats. And is that because of the subdivision timeline you were just referring to, or is some other reason the timing got changed? Do you know?
I think Mary knows.
I'm concerned about this process.
I think Remington Flats was actually scheduled ahead, and
Was it?
the whole thing just got moved.
The whole thing
I'll
moved.
let Mary. Mary,
Okay, I just wasn't remembering correctly, but because I had the 15th in my head for Mullen.
it was, and it got moved, but the whole schedule got shifted.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
And just to, the Mullen plan will be coming forward, but Remington Flats was deemed sufficient under the current regulations and annexation and zoning. So per state law, those are the rules that will apply through the approval of it and through the phases being filed, regardless of if the Mullen plan gets approved after.
Right.
Or even if it got approved before the Remington Flats was approved, it goes back to when it was deemed sufficient.
Okay. Thank you. I feel, I don't know, this could be a comment later, but since we're talking about it, I have felt a little blindsided by some of these big subdivisions coming into the Mullen area when we're doing all this other planning and zoning. And so maybe it was me not paying sufficient attention, although I've actually talked to some elected officials who were surprised to hear the same thing. So it's really unfortunate is all, and it's what I said last time, and I realize they have a legal right to move it forward now before the plan and zoning is in place. But it's really too bad. A lot of public money is going into this process, and from the local to the federal level. And so it's really disappointing that they're not matching up with the plan. And they're pretty big. And anyway, I'm sorry to go off on that, but I'm pretty concerned about it. And I really, actually, I kind of regret my vote on Heron's Landing because it's not matching up with the plan. And makes sense, but anyway, I'm sure we'll be talking about that.
May I just add one additional clarification?
Thanks, Mary. Maybe you can help me understand it better.
I mean, yeah, in the big picture, it's always better to have the planning ahead of when the development is coming down the pike in certain areas, right? It's always good to have the planning done and have the zoning done. But one thing I think that gets lost is that these developers were working on these projects sometimes for 2 years, and they've been paying, they purchased the property, they've been paying consultants, they've been doing stormwater studies and all sorts of things to get ready just to submit their packet. And so that's kind of why that rule is in place. And, you know, in hindsight, it would have been great if we could have been funded for the Mullen Plan during the recession years, but before all this
Yeah, right.
development was.
Yeah,
So I
Yeah.
understand the timing on the public end. We do. We have a lot of federal and local funds going into it, county and city. But you know, the developers also have been working a really long time where no one even knew what they were doing, putting their money into these projects. And for them, you know, they probably can't afford to put the brakes on and just wait and see what the plan comes out. It may cost them a lot of money, you know.
well, and I
Take
appreciate
advantage.
you saying that, and that was why I voted for it last time. But I'm kind of, you know, I have like post-decisional dissonance, but it doesn't matter. That's helpful. I realize that we can't have it all,
Yeah.
but I'm pretty excited about the plan and would hope that the developers would really want to match up to it. Like, so is this trail that they don't want to put on that last development? Is that just gonna end in the middle of nowhere now? I mean, there's some things that are, you know, could be problematic down the road as a result as well, but thank you for that.
Shane, did you have a question for staff here?
I do have a question for staff, and it's regarding what is the appropriate time during a meeting to recuse yourself from a specific public hearing or agenda item?
Karen?
Yeah.
You want to answer that or?
I was looking to see if it actually, I think, Zach, let me pull up my tabs again. I had your bylaws up here. What have I done with them? Crap.
I mean, I know it's okay for any member, even if you're going to recuse yourself on the vote, to be a part of the discussion on a project. I think at the time the motion is made, certainly by then, you should, you know, get your hand up before the motion, or whether there's discussion on the motion is probably the best time when there's discussion on the motion, to let folks know that, you know, you're going to recuse yourself from that vote.
Yeah, and I'd
Okay.
probably actually suggest that unless it's something that comes to light later, like you discover that you have a connection, my suggestion is actually to do it as early as possible. So either at the beginning of the meeting or at least at the beginning of that agenda item is when you should typically, if you have identified that there's a perceived or possible or real conflict of interest, that you should declare it at that point. Because really during the agenda item, you can participate, but you can't, but you should really do it almost more like a member of the public would, right? And so you wouldn't want to,
Sure.
So for people who are doing actual developments and that one might become before the planning board, usually we'd, you know, if you were in the meeting, you might actually go and sit in the audience in that case with the team sort of thing. So think about it like we do in an actual public meeting. But at a minimum, I would say before the agenda item starts, usually people will even stay at the beginning of the meeting just to let people know that they would plan to recuse themselves, so that that helps admin
Sure,
staff,
this was just
planning staff.
This was just in relation to last week where my firm was mentioned in a presentation. I had no clue that our firm had done anything on the project. And as soon as I saw it mentioned, I did recuse myself, but I had no prior knowledge of it at all. So I just wanted to make sure there was appropriate timing.
Yeah, there is a provision about declaring conflicts of interest in your bylaws. So that's a good one to go back and just take a quick look at. The bylaws aren't super detailed to read, so it's pretty easy read. But usually if something like that comes up, that's go ahead and just make the announcement when it's time to talk, kind of at the beginning of the planning board's time to talk. That's totally fine as well. Sometimes we don't realize that there's connections.
I think, though, it's important to underscore the value of having a planning board member with actual experience with the plan in hand. So as long as the planning board member says that they have to recuse themselves, that's great.
Yeah.
But it's really valuable to the discussion to hear the insight from that member on the issue at hand. I know we had that experience last year with Jason, and it was really valuable.
a great point, Peter. Note for the record that Caroline Lauer has just joined the meeting.
Sorry, I'm late, everyone. Good to see you all.
It's
Carol.
noted, thank you.
I have a question, Karen or Mary, on the open meeting laws, going back to that. Is there anything that precludes one-on-one conversations among planning board members about agendas or topics in between meetings?
There isn't. And there's kind of two pieces of that. You could be approached by a member of the public or by a governing body official or anyone about something that's coming before the board. That can happen. And then you could also end up bumping into a planning board member, having a conversation with a planning board member. Generally, my suggestion is try to avoid those conversations, but knowing that those things happen and people love to impart their perspectives, probably the best thing you can do is for planning board business is to just put it out there. I ended up having this conversation. Here's what we talked about. A declaration that doesn't necessarily flavor your perspective on things, and you're looking forward to the discussion tonight. That's kind of the key thing to do, is just kind of talk about what happened and put it out there so that it's open, transparent, and everyone has access to it. And if someone has a question, they can follow up with you.
Can I add something? I mean, I think the best is to, especially if you're out hearing from the public or a neighbor or something asking a question about a project, I would listen. It's important to hear people's comments, but not provide an opinion so that there's any chance that your vote could not shouldn't be counted, or there might be some concern about your vote. But also you can give them information about how they can participate in the process, where they can provide comments, who they should contact, that kind of thing. And when the public meetings are and that sort of thing. It's really good information to get people to participate in the meeting itself.
And Mary, just to clarify, so that's prior to a vote. The example that Sean gave of communicating with someone after a vote, it should be fine, right?
That's not nearly the same.
No.
Yeah, it's more about like how you're influenced on your vote as opposed to, whether you talk about it afterwards, because we all have a right to voice our opinions on something, a project. We could go to the city council and voice our opinions next week or whatever, tomorrow, whatever it is.
The key when you do that is just to remember that unless that you're not speaking on behalf of the planning board at that point, is
right, absolutely
on your behalf and declaring.
Yeah, I think the time, but the sequencing is important to remember.
Absolutely.
I think.
Yes.
Great, thanks for that clarification. Yeah, that's helpful. Okay, any more questions on these topics for staff while we have these experts at our disposal?
Thanks for working so hard.
Yeah. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Mary, for taking our questions. This is a really good discussion on a lot of different things that are important to us. So thanks.
Yep.
Okay, we're gonna move on. I guess before I move on, I think I should note for the record that in the last item in public comment, it came up here. We have included in the meeting packet that's available online some comments that were received after last meeting on the Heron's Landing project. So I'm not going to read them or anything online at this point, but just to note that there are some public comments there in the record that were submitted by staff. So moving on to the two public hearings that we have tonight. The first one, item 6.1, is a rezone at 3705 Highway 200 East in East Missoula. And staff from Missoula County, Matt Hamel will present. Matt, if you're there,
hello.
The floor is yours.
Well, good evening, members of the board. My name is Matt Heimel. I'm planner with Missoula County Community Planning Services. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have a presentation. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Just let me know if there are any issues on my end with the video or audio on my PowerPoint. So Tri-East Incorporated, that is represented by Paul Forson with IMEG, is proposing a rezoning for the properties addressed as 3705 Highway 200 East. These lots are legally described as lots 5 through 11 and lots 16 through 26 of Block 19 in the East Missoula edition. And the approximate 2.3 acres surrounded by Michigan Avenue, Randall Street, Minnesota Avenue, and Clyde Street are currently zoned CR3 residential with a Canyon Gate Ole's planned variation. Not able to, okay, now I can change slides, it was frozen there. So here's another slide showing the site location in East Missoula, just off of Highway 200. The applicant intends to utilize the property for commercial use. The applicant is proposing a commercial zoning designation to allow for an anticipated storage facility use that will also comply with the neighborhood center land use designation of the growth policy. Surrounding land uses include commercial to the north and west and residential to the south and east. Adjacent zoning districts include CC2 general commercial to the north and east and west, and properties to the south and southeast are unzoned. So as I said, it's currently zoned CR3 residential with a Canyon Gate / Ole's planned variation, and that planned variation was enacted to allow for reduced setbacks on an attached housing development that never came to fruition. So now the applicant is trying to have it zoned commercial for anticipated commercial use. So the proposed district is CC1 neighborhood commercial. The intent of the CC1 neighborhood commercial zoning district is to provide for convenient shopping for a limited neighborhood market, which involves retail enterprises, dispensing commodities, and providing personal or professional services to the individual. The applicable land use plan is the Missoula Area Land Use Element dated 2019, and that was an amendment to the 2016 Missoula County Growth Policy, or the growth policy that was last amended in 2016, to rephrase that. The land use element designates this property as neighborhood center. Oh, skip that. And the neighborhood center land use has a recommendation for a mix of residential, neighborhood services, offices, retail, and institutional uses. The uses and density that are permitted in CC1 zoning do lay the framework for development to allow for opportunities that are identified in the comprehensive plan and detailed in the neighborhood center land use designation. And the uses listed in CC1 do conform to the objectives of the land use element and also the intent of the zoning regulations themselves. So regarding comment, we did receive some agency comments just about requirements for future use, mainly things that will be handled in building permitting, such as drainage. But we did receive one public comment of support that's also included in the packet tonight. So staff does recommend that the zoning request be approved. A draft motion is available in the staff report and it's also shown on the screen. I'm available for questions, and I do believe the applicant's representative is also on the call tonight. If recommended for approval tonight, this item is expected to be brought to the Board of County Commissioners for a public hearing on September 24th. If there are any questions, I can take those now.
Great. Thank you very much, Matt. Planning board members, if you do have questions, please use the raise the hand function if you've got that on your Zoom console tonight, or the chat function. I will start it off. Matt, I just had a general question, and is this an area that's planned to be annexed by the city in the near or long-term future? And if so, is there a comparable city zoning that this C-C1 corresponds to?
I'm not aware of a current plan for annexation. I do know this area is on city sewer with deferred annexation in place. Comparable districts are within the range of B and C districts in Title 20.
Does the zoning here require sidewalks to be built along Minnesota Avenue or Michigan?
The Missoula County commercial zoning districts do not have requirements for sidewalks. In subdivision review, there might be some requirements to install pedestrian facilities, but just as far as zoning compliance review, installation of sidewalks would not be a requirement.
Okay. That's all the questions that I have. Okay. Any more questions from planning board? Shane?
Did we take public comment?
We have not taken public comment. We should do that. Yeah, let's do that before we do public. Before we come back to questions. So thank you, Nita. So at this point, we will open up the phone lines for public comment on this item. So if anyone out there in the Ethernet would like to make a comment on this agenda item, now would be the time. Donna, if you could put the phone number and call-in information on the screen for us here. Okay, great. So the phone numbers are up on the screen. For those of you using the telephone, somehow the number to call is 1-253-215-8782, and the meeting ID is 960-049-3694. So when you call, you're going to be placed in a virtual waiting room, and you'll be admitted to the meeting in the order that the calls are received. And staff will let you know when it's your turn to speak. Please remember to mute your television or your phone, however you're listening to the meeting. Otherwise, we'll have an echo here at the meeting. So with that, I will go on mute here and give folks time to call in to make a comment. Okay, that's been a good amount of time. Seeing no public comment, we'll move on to the next section of this public hearing. Would the developer or owner, if they're there, like to make any comments or a presentation?
Hello, Vince. Paul Forsting, IMEG.
Hey, Paul.
Hey, I don't have too much to add here. I just wanted to thank Matt for his help on this rezone. He pushed us through the rezone. He helped me through the rezone process, and we did it really quickly. And so I very much appreciate that. There's some nuances to this one that Matt helped me with, and he kept me on schedule, and even probably more than I probably deserved on this one. So Matt did a good job on that, and I wanted to pass it on. So and with that, I'm available for comments, and I appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you, Paul. So we'll go back to planning board members. Neva, you've got a question or comment?
Yeah, I have a quick question. Did I understand Matt to say that there would be storage units on this site as well? Or maybe I misunderstood that. It's going to be Ollie's?
Matt or Paul?
Oh, I'm sorry. Was it a question for staff or?
Well, either
I can chime in and say that, there's an application and it says what you have to put in. Before COVID, the owners here were thinking storage. That was the idea, but they like the suite of options that are available in this commercial zoning. The storage is what their initial thoughts were at. I don't know that they're there anymore. I don't know what their thought is. That'll take its own approval.
Well, partly I asked that because, now there's that huge storage unit thing going in on the south side of the interstate right before you get to the Bonner Milltown exit. And, and there's another one right across on the other side. It's just and I realize East Missoula is, a further west, but still, there's this proliferation of these units. And it's hard to believe we have enough stuff to fill them all, but maybe we do. So
I share your concern, Eva. Yeah, that's just Paul Forsting again here. I would say I share your interest in seeing those projects go up all over the place. I don't know. It seems like for every apartment or small lot we have an attached storage unit outside of town for it. And so I don't know that hopefully we can overcome that at some point. I think some planning is probably needed to guide these in a spot where we all like it. But that's what I'd say to it. There's nothing that binds them to doing storage here, and they have to get that approved as well.
Yeah. Okay. So that's just one of the things that would be allowed in this.
Well, yeah, it is, but it's definitely something that could happen here. It's allowed in the zoning, and it's.
Okay. Thank you.
Great, Joshua.
Yeah, I guess I'm just piggybacking on Neva's question. I'm looking at the permitted and conditional uses, I believe, for this zoning district, and it looks like residential and commercial mini warehouse would be a conditional use. Is that correct, Matt?
That is correct, and I'll just provide a distinction. In the current Missoula County zoning regulations, a conditional use only implies that there are particular standards within the zoning regulations. So yes, it's a conditional. It would be a administrative review at the staff level for certain requirements within zoning.
Okay, thank you. I guess then just an additional question is, so this zoning change in this new zoning district, if the intended use is for storage, is this the correct zoning district? Is this the correct one?
So if the intended use is residential and commercial mini warehousing, this and the other commercial, say CC2, for example, would both have it as a conditional use. In very early stages in pre-application meetings, speaking with the applicant and IMEG and at the time territorial, we landed on CC1 as the most compatible zoning district with the neighborhood center land use designation.
Okay, thank you.
Sure thing.
Peter, do you still have a question, or your hand went down?
I have a question, Vince.
David,
It's just,
please.
it's just to piggyback on the thread of this, for East Missoula, this would seem to be a key component of any future commercial type uses there. And so, yes, I go along, and that's, I think mini storage would be a misuse of use. Sometimes people use it as an interim use for 10 years or so. But so Paul, I'd encourage your folks to think about a more comprehensive use, maybe a mix, you know, on the backside residential, on the front side commercial. Here's an opportunity. I just want to pump it up, but that's the way to go.
Thanks, Dave. Loud and clear, yeah.
And, you know, one, just to add to that is that, you know, when you think about neighborhood center, you know, storage units are not what you really think of, or at least not what I think of as something that would really bring people together, a place to interact, right? I mean, it's what I think of when I hear the term neighborhood center, place to buy things. So hopefully, because that's such a strategic location, hopefully something more robust could happen there.
Yeah. How,
Peter.
I guess my question is, how ephemeral are storage units? How long do you figure they last on a site?
You know, Peter, I would say anecdotally, I've thought of that often. Hey, you know, how long could they be there? It's definitely a temporary use, but it could be there 50, 100 years. And so for us, that's all of our lives, you know, it doesn't matter how temporary that is.
Well, yeah, we tend to think of, our zoning decisions as what's going to happen to this property in the next 50 years. And, you know, if somebody decides to tear down their home, you know, we thought it was going to be a house and put up a parking lot, no song intended, then that's their, you know, as long as it fits the zoning that we have approved, they can do that. So I guess my question is, do people build storage units and figure they're there for 10 years, tear them down and do something else? Or is this the plan for a long term?
You know, Peter, I don't know. I would say much longer than 10 years, though. I mean, I don't think you know, I think maybe their business plan, and I'm not privy to any of that, is probably like, hey, let's make money in 10 years or something, right? But, you know, I'm sure they've got a plan to keep it longer. But it is very temporary in that you could clear those off in a day and put something better there, but it does change the area. That being said, we've really only got 2 zoning options here with our growth policy, and these are the 2 that are available for us. And they both guide us into this channel that allows storage units. Had we not checked the box storage units and just said, oh, we're going to do any new commercial that kind of matches the area, just like the commercial that's along the highway there. That's, you know, that is kind of where we're at. We are getting new zoning here. There is new zoning in the works in the county. And so that would change all this. And I think, you know, the county's not obligated. We'll just see where it goes, I suppose. But they do want to have a commercial zoning district here. And I hope, you know, Ole is he's a long-term resident there, but he's a long-term user of that area. And I hope that he sees East Missoula with the same passion as some of you folks do. I don't like seeing the storage units there personally. Yeah.
Great. So next will be Shane and then Sean.
I think this is a question for Matt. Matt, I think you sufficiently described how a conditional use would work. Can you explain how a special exception works?
So yes, Matt Heimel again here with CAPS. A special exception then would be probably what most would think of as a conditional use permit. We refer to as special exception use permit. That would go to the Missoula County Board of Adjustment for a public hearing. So those are the uses which have more of a public review process, and we check it for compatibility with the area. And there are certain review criteria within the county's zoning regulations also to address those.
So I guess what I'm maybe keying in on here is, well, I guess that's the end of my question.
Okay.
John, you got a question?
Thank you. Yeah, I think this is probably for Matt. So Matt, I just wanted to clarify that provided that this gets approved for rezoning, that anything that comes up within the permitted or conditional use has got to go through another approval process. Is that correct?
Matt Heimel again here with CAP. So to summarize how uses can go through in this zoning district if approved, anything listed under the current regulations as permitted or conditional would be reviewed administratively through zoning compliance and building permit review. And then if anything under a special exception goes to a public hearing, all of them need some kind of review. We check it for compliance, and any use would need a permit.
And then just a quick follow-up. What was the other possible rezoning option besides the C1 here? Paul mentioned that there was two.
The other option was a CC2 general commercial. That is a more intensive zoning district and intensive as far as the scale of use. And even though that's the zoning district that is adjacent to here, CC1 is the most compatible with the current land use designation.
Great, thank you.
Sure thing.
Okay, any more questions from planning board members? If not, at this time, I would take a motion on this, if anyone would like to offer a motion at this time. After which, if the motion's seconded, we'll have discussion on the motion and then a vote.
Matt, would you mind reposting the motion, please?
Sure, just a moment. There it is.
I'll move that the request for zoning the lot zone CR3 residential with the Canyon Gates / Ole's planned variation to the C-C1 neighborhood commercial zoning district be approved based on the findings of fact contained in the staff report, public testimony, and written comment. The property subject to this approval is legally described as lots 5-11 and lot 16-26, block 19, East Missoula addition, section 24, township 13 north, range 19 west, PMM, Missoula County, Montana. And they say academics right in awkwardly.
That was a mouthful, but you did it wonderfully, Neva. Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
Hold on.
For the record, Stephanie Potts just joined the meeting. Welcome, Stephanie. So is there a second to the motion by Neva?
I'll second it.
Oh.
Okay, with the tie goes to Sean. So Sean seconds the motion. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to say on this this item before we call a vote? Now would be the time. Shane and then Sean.
Sure. I guess in looking through the current zoning, the C-R3 residential, as a special exception, it looks like you are allowed to do any of the permitted uses allowed in the C-C1 district. And it feels to me like the C-R3 is probably the more appropriate zoning district for this area. And that any permitted use in the C-C1 would also be allowed in the C-R3 through the special exception clause, which would require public input at the time of submission. It's what I was gathering from Matt. And so I guess with that, I plan to vote no.
Okay, I mean, I think, Matt, if you have anything to add here, I think it might be helpful for planning board members to respond to that.
So the residential zoning district does not, although it would have the commercial uses within a special exception process, the rezoning was opted by the applicant, and it was supportable given the current land use designation, which the CR3 doesn't exactly match up to all of the recommendations for the neighborhood center land use. In original discussions, we were looking at would it either be something the applicant could go for a special exception, or would they rather rezone, and the rezoning path was chosen just to allow for the full breadth of the permitted and conditional uses.
Okay, thank you, Matt. And Sean.
Thanks, Vince. So I just wanted to maybe echo some of the comments earlier and encourage Paul to convey and encourage to the folks that he's working for, the owners, that, you know, like as community members and as board members, we see the potential for this land being much greater than storage units. There's, you know, like East Missoula deserves more than another storage unit center. I don't know, I can't even, it's like 3 blocks from the next one. I go out there all the time to go shooting. So I see that storage unit all the time. And so I just wanted to say that, just to encourage Paul to convey that kind of feeling from the board that, you know, we're trying to make East Missoula a nicer, better place, and, you know, some commercial usage, maybe with some housing on the back or whatever, would be great if they can afford it. That's all I got.
Thanks, Sean. Are there any more comments from planning board members on this? Okay. Oh, Joshua, there you go.
I do. I
Then Stephanie.
want to make sure I understand correctly what Shane said. So all of the permitted uses in C-C1 are also permitted in the current zoning district, but under special, well, I don't know the nomenclature, special use extension. Is that correct? Am I understanding that correctly? So the process would just require, would potentially be more onerous to get those permitted uses under the existing zoning. Is that, but they could be achieved? Is that what I'm understanding? Sorry, Matt, that's probably for you, or maybe for Shane, if you could help me understand that.
Yeah, Matt, if you could add again to this question, that would be helpful.
Sure, so that's correct. The R3 residential has, as a special exception use, any of the permitted uses allowed in
C-C1.
C-C districts. And so that means they would have to go to the Board of Adjustment for a special exception use permit to prove a compatibility with the area. And that's a public review process. And the applicants also had the option to come tonight with this zoning application to propose a rezoning based on compatibility with the growth policy and the land use designation. The adopted land use designation here is the neighborhood center, which lends itself well to the neighborhood commercial zoning district. So for example, one of the compatible permitted uses in neighborhood commercial is say retail, trade, and service, just first one on the permitted use list.
Right.
If under a compatible zoning district in a neighborhood center, that can just be reviewed administratively as a permitted use. Also, for example, repair services as a conditional use, just examples of some of the permitted and conditional uses in CC1.
Right.
Whereas in CR3, there's no guarantee that a special exception use can be permitted by the Board of Adjustment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the uses in C-C1 better. I don't know why they checked the box for storage units. It just seems to me like, I mean, I know maybe that's not something that we should consider, but I think it's flavoring the discussion a bit, you know, even though that use designation is probably the more appropriate one according to the growth policy. I don't know. So it gives me pause, I guess, a little bit.
And
The other thing to
this,
think
guys,
about is the
it's-
space and bulk requirements, which are different between the two districts. And the space and bulk requirements for the commercial districts are more appropriate for commercial uses. And the other thing to think about that Paul pointed out is when we go through the process of updating the county zoning, thinking about the commensurate zoning, we want to have it line up with what it should be zoned. Really, the checking the box on what they intended is kind of extraneous information because they could do anything that was listed as a potential use.
Great. Okay. Thanks. That's helpful, Karen.
Stephanie, and then Caroline.
Yeah, Vince, I was just logistically, since I missed most of the discussion, although I have been reviewing the materials, was planning to abstain from this vote. I just wanted to check with you and with Donna to make sure we've got numbers for a quorum, and that's okay.
Oh, thanks, Stephanie. Yes, we do have a quorum, and I think that makes sense for you to do. Caroline.
Okay, just sorry, another point of clarification on all of this. To Shane's point and the discussion on the storage unit, and given what Karen said, that it's sort of extra information. But if the zoning were not to change and they wanted to do a storage unit, they would have to go through a special permitting process to approve that specific use. Whereas if we approve the change in the zoning tonight and they wanted to do a storage unit, they could just do that no matter what, even though there are intentions to likely not do a storage unit. But just given the conversation about sort of imploring them to think about something different, just wanted to make sure that I have that all correct.
Great. Staff, if you could, it sounds right to me, but Matt, can you just confirm for us or Karen?
Sounds correct with the added layer that in the current zoning, there's also the Canyon Gate Ollie's plan variation that was specifically for an attached housing development. So that would also need to go through a repeal or amendment process if storage units were sought.
Okay.
The other thing to know about storage units is depending on the scale of the development, they might have to go through a building for lease or rent process, which is a separate public review process as well.
Even with this rezone, Karen, is that what you mean?
Yeah, I think that's right. Is that right, Matt? Or no, they get out of it because it's zoned. Yep, sorry.
That's right. Yeah, they'll be zoned. So.
Well, I mean, I think my take on this is, you know, it is really tempting to and it's almost impossible not to consider a use that's been suggested for this, but it is a rezoning, and really anything could happen on this property. Even if storage units go in the near term, the rezoning itself transcends what the next developed use is. And yeah, I mean, I think staff looked at this, and I think I concur with them that the zoning, the commercial zoning, is appropriate, even though I share the hesitation that a lot of us seem to share of streamlining storage units to go on this site. Nonetheless, I'm going to vote to approve the rezone.
Yeah, I agree with Vince.
Okay. Any more comments before we call a vote? Okay. All in favor of the motion that was made, please say aye.
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 All in favor, or all opposed, rather, same sign?
No.
Okay, no from Neva and Shane. The motion passes. Thank you very much for the presentation, Matt, and great discussion here.
Excuse me, could I get a clarification? Did Stephanie vote or did you abstain?
I abstained.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Moving on to the next public hearing for the evening, we have a rezoning at 601 West Broadway. presented by Caitlin McCafferty and Mary McRae at the City of Missoula. So Caitlin, please take it away.
Can you all hear me and see my screen okay?
Yeah, looks good.
Great.
Good.
So my name is Caitlin McCafferty. I'm a planner on this project. The applicant is WGM Group representing the Wise Family Trust, requesting a rezone of the property at 601 West Broadway from Special District Riverfront Triangle Subdistrict D to Central Business District CBD 4 with an outer core design excellence downtown overlay. Location of the two parcels on West Broadway, right after the fork of West Front Street and West Broadway. There's a closer aerial of the subject parcel. The property fronts West Broadway and West Front Street, as well as the Clark Fork River. The applicable regional plan is the Missoula City Growth Policy 2035, which recommends a land use designation of urban center, shown in red on the slide. This land use designation is intended to address the concentration of downtown uses, which include offices, retail, arts and entertainment, eating and drinking establishments, as well as residential uses. The property to the south is designated as parks and open lands, shown in green on the slide. This is the current zoning map. As you can see, this is the last parcel left in this Riverfront Triangle Special Zoning District. The properties adjacent to the east were rezoned from Riverfront Triangle Special Zoning District to CBD 4 Central Business District and OP1 Open Space back in 2017. To the north and west of the parcel are properties zoned C14 Neighborhood Commercial, and to the south is the river and the riverfront. The 2019 Downtown Master Plan brings up another element beyond comparing the proposed and current zoning, which is the riverfront trail easement. So the 2019 Missoula Downtown Master Plan describes the Clark Fork River in Missoula as a defining feature, and it recommends an extension of the riverfront trail along the north bank of the Clark Fork River, which includes the southern frontage of the subject parcel. It's shown in that orange line right here on this map from the Downtown Master Plan. This is the North Riverside Parks and Trails map, and as you can see, it also highlights a potential mixed-use trail along the riverside of the subject parcel. The applicant's submittal packet for the rezone addresses the riverfront trail by including a 15-foot wide public trail easement in this dark gray across the subject property east to west and connecting to sidewalks on West Broadway at the western edge of the property. So this slide is showing the proposed easement map for the riverfront trail along the south of the parcel right there. In regards to the riverfront trail, staff is recommending that the applicant and the City of Missoula enter into a development agreement to cover the dedication and width of the easement, as well as construction and management of the trail. The proposed development agreement would address the following points. First, include a 20-foot wide public non-motorized access easement filed with the development agreement. Include construction of the riverfront trail along the north shore of the Clark Fork River from east to west without interruption or detour, connecting to West Broadway on the west end. State the developer's responsibility for the cost of a minimum 10-foot wide asphalt trail. State the City of Missoula's responsibility for the cost of upsizing the trail to 14-foot wide and concrete, as well as repair, maintenance, and replacement. The development agreement should also state that the design of the riverfront trail and any variation from the standards, including easement width, surface of the width of the trail, lighting, provision for trash, receptacles, and benches, shall be specific to the site and approved by City Parks and Rec. And finally, the development agreement shall be reviewed by City Parks, Missoula Redevelopment Agency, and Development Services, as well as approved by City Council. Now to dive into the main differences between the current zoning Riverfront Triangle Special Zoning District and the proposed zoning CBD4 Central Business District. The main aspects of the Riverfront Triangle Special Zoning District are that it comes with design standards. The district requires dedication and construction of that riverfront trail. It requires parking structures instead of parking lots. Has limitations on uses and restrictions on locations for those uses. The special district has a maximum height of 30 feet within 50 feet of the river and a maximum height of 52 feet along West Broadway. The current zoning code also reverts to Title 19 for any non-specified standards, and any new uses that aren't specified in Title 19 are not allowed, even if they exist in Title 20. So for example, a microbrewery is a use that has been added in Title 20 but doesn't exist in Title 19. So under the current zoning, this would not be allowed. In comparison, CBD4 provides for a wide variety of commercial uses that align with the growth policy and the land use recommendation in that. New permitted uses are added to Title 20 city zoning ordinance yearly with maintenance updates. The maximum height in CBD4 is 125 feet with a step back of 10 feet above 85 feet at the street edge. The proposed zoning code would have a design excellence overlay to address those design standards that are in the current zoning. In CBD4, the proposed zoning, there are no front, rear, or side yard setbacks unless a parcel abuts a residential district, which this parcel does not. The only setback in CBD4 for this parcel is a setback of 50 feet from the 100-year floodplain on the riverfront. This setback can contain the riverfront trail. And just to compare, the Riverfront Triangle Special Zoning District requires structures to be set back 50 feet from top of bank of the river. For parking, the Riverfront Triangle Special Zoning District does require off-street parking per Title 19 and requires them to be in parking structures, not lots. In CBD4, the proposed zoning, off-street parking is not required. However, if the developer were to provide parking, design excellence overlay standards would regulate the design and location of any proposed parking lots or structures. In general, the main differences between CBD4 Central Business District with the design excellence overlay provides the following compared to the current zoning of the Riverfront Triangle Special Zoning District. CBD4 has a wider variety of commercial uses without the prescriptive requirements of the current zoning. It provides a mix of permitted residential and non-residential uses, which is similar to the current zoning. CBD4 has an increased height to 125 feet with a step back of 10 feet above 85 feet at the street edge compared to the current zoning, which has a maximum height of 52 feet. A 50-foot setback from the 100-year floodplain in CBD4 is required. However, there's no requirement to extend the riverfront trail within the setback area without the development agreement that was discussed earlier. Whereas in the current zoning, a 50-foot setback is required from top of river bank, and extension of the riverfront trail within the setback area is also required. Finally, no off-street parking is required in CBD4 compared to Title 19 parking requirements in the current zoning. Here's some photos of the lot as it sits today. The first two are taken from West Broadway, looking to the east and west, and the bottom photo is from across the river to give you a visual of that river bank. These are some very preliminary sketches of a possible development of the site. Please note that these images are preliminary. They're meant to be illustrative. No plans have been submitted or approved or gone through design excellence or anything. It's just to illustrate what could possibly happen at this site. Now I will address how the proposed change in zoning is in accordance with zoning amendment review criteria found both in state law and in Title 20 as shown on the slide. So first, the growth policy, the rezoning of the subject property to CBD4 Central Business District with the Design Excellence Overlay complies with Urban Center, which is the land use designation, because the 2035 growth policy recommends CBD4 as a relatable zoning district for lands within the Urban Center land use designation. Also, the motion requiring dedication of a trail easement and development agreement are accommodating the 2019 downtown master plan. Public services and transportation, the rezoning is in an area served by public water, sewer, sidewalks, transit, and public roads. The motion requiring the dedication of an easement and the development agreement for the extension of the riverfront trail enhances non-motorized facilities. Next is compatible urban growth. The rezone and easement will facilitate mixed-use development in the urban center. The next promotes public health and safety. The rezone does this. CBD has a 50-foot, as CBD4 has a 50-foot setback for structures from the 100-year floodplain, and the motion requires dedication of an easement and development agreement to provide for the extension of the riverfront trail. District character and suitability of uses. The rezone and easement gives consideration to the character by providing a mix of residential and commercial uses with densities that are recommended by the growth policy. And finally, there's no error or inconsistency in the zoning ordinance. This zoning amendment is a map amendment, not a text amendment. Therefore, there's no change to Title 20 zoning ordinance with the map amendment to rezone the subject property. The zoning implements the recommended land use designation of the growth policy. The recommended motion requires dedication of an easement and development agreement for the riverfront trail, which implements a recommendation from the Missoula Downtown Master Plan. The rezoning is in the best interest of the city because it implements the recommendations in these two plans, the growth policy and the Downtown Master Plan. All in all, staff recommends approval of the adoption of an ordinance to rezone the property located at 601 West Broadway from Special District SD Riverfront Triangle, Subdistrict D, to CBD4 Central Business District, DE-D, Outer Core Design Excellence Downtown Overlay, subject to the applicant and the city executing a development agreement and public non-motorized access easement filed with the county clerk and recorder prior to the effective date of the ordinance, which is 120 days from council approval. The development agreement and easement documents shall be reviewed by City Parks, Missoula Redevelopment Agency, and Development Services, and approved by City Council. The development agreement shall include construction of the riverfront trail along the north shore of the Clark Fork River from east to west, connecting to West Broadway on the west end and to the riverfront trail on property adjacent to the east without interruption or detour. Developer's responsibility for the cost of a minimum 10-foot wide trail with 1-foot shoulders on either side of the path. The city of Missoula's responsibility for the cost of upsizing the trail to 14-foot wide in concrete. The city of Missoula's responsibility for repair, maintenance, and replacement of the trail once constructed, and a 20-foot wide public non-motorized access easement filed with the development agreement. Lastly, design of the riverfront trail and any variation from the standards, including easement width, service width of the trail, lighting, provisions for trash receptacles and benches shall be specific to the site and approved by City Parks and Rec. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Caitlin. Okay, is the developer or the owner present and wanting to make a presentation or talk as well?
Yes, thank you, Vince. This is Nick Kaufman with WGM Group. Can I share the screen?
Please do, Nick.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank Caitlin and Mary McRae for their hard work on this project right up until the end of last week. You guys are awesome and really appreciate it. So with me here today is Carl Posowitz, who's the architect on the project and also represents the potential buyer of the property. Kate Dinsmore is a landscape architect and Ryan Salisbury is the engineer, and they're in the wings, but I don't expect them to testify at this hearing. So the site was historically used for a tire sales and service building. Back in the day when Highway 10 was what we call now West Broadway, gas stations and tire stores and all kinds of things along that. And some of the old remnant hotels still exist on either end of Broadway. So that's a carryover. It's carried over from the day when people turned their back to the river instead of recognizing the value that it has to their property and to the community. The area is in transition. We just heard, I think, in the newsreel yesterday that the Drift project proposed on the Riverfront Triangle has now been withdrawn, kind of a result of the impacts to the entertainment business from COVID-19. That was sad news indeed. The existing zoning, and I think that Caitlin hit this better than we could, is really outdated for the community vision for the area. We're rezoning the site to allow for a mixed-use office, and you see that in the architectural renderings for the site, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. So why the rezoning? Well, the current zoning is that Riverfront Triangle. I'm not sure anything was ever permitted during the law of that Riverfront Triangle zoning district. Caitlin talked about the reasons better than we could, but really it allows for an appropriate use of the parcel and increased building height and flexibility for higher density. So when we get to the part about the site plan, I'll talk about the expense of the parking and trying to fit the uses on this very constrained site, right? And how that parking needs to be paid for with a higher building, which is in line with a growth policy and the downtown master plan. So we've done a lot of work in this area, WGM Group has. There used to be a Safeway store right next to St. Hospital that got down the street, and that was a major effort to keep a grocery store on that north side, west side to serve that neighborhood. It was no small effort. And now that site has manifested itself as a locally owned grocery store, so that's a double win. We worked with Providence on previous expansions and updates to provide national healthcare to this community and in a location in the downtown, which provides employees to visit all the shops and eateries in the downtown area. So that employment base is significant. And then we also have worked on the Riverfront Triangle in a number of capacities. So Caitlin showed you the slide of the property, but I want to point something out to you here. So this is about 250 feet wide. We have about 250 feet of riverfront here, and that's all. We have a multi-story hospital right across the street here and multi-story expansion of the hospital where the old Safeway store was. But we have a quarter of a mile of open space right across here, with the exception of the current swimming pool building operated by the city. So a quarter of a mile before you hit the building on the other side of the YMCA and floodplain down this way. This is a very wide open space corridor, much wider than anything else you see on either side of it. And we're blessed, even to have a constrained site, to be able to have that much open space on the south side of the property. So I'm going to skip right over this one because Kevin covered that very well on this one. Site opportunities, river frontage, they're just not making any more of that. The riverfront trail system, they're not making any more of that either. Well, hopefully we'll make some more of it with this project. It's adjacent to the Riverfront Triangle, which will be developed someday. It's too important a location adjacent to the river, Lexington town not to. We have great views of McCormick Park and Lolo Peak. We're across the street from the hospital, and we're part of the vision for the downtown map plan. But there are some site constraints. There's a floodplain, and it's a little tiny parcel, and we need to fit a riverfront trail system on there. That's vital and integral to our original proposal, and it stays true through the staff report today. Adjacent to the Riverfront Triangle and a future entertainment venue, that can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. We hope it's a good thing. The current zoning is special district Riverfront Triangle, enough said about that. And we are going to supply parking here. Even though we're not wired in the CBD 4 to do that, you have to provide parking for your clients, your customers, and your users. And the location of buildings on adjoining parcels that are right on the property line. So this shows you some of the elevational constraints, the top of the property down to the river, and they're pretty significant. So here's the site plan. Let's take a peek at this really quick. So Caitlin talked to you about the 100-year floodplain. So this dark blue line is the 100-year floodplain right here, okay? The blue line, the light blue line, the top bank here, and it kind of meanders around a little bit. This is the 50-foot setback from the 100-year floodplain. So you'll see that this setback, the red setback, is parallel to the blue line, right? That's that 50-foot setback that she talked about. We showed a 15-foot trail easement in our initial meetings with development services. Everybody felt that that was the width as we're closer into it, and the requirements for the zoning for the riverfront triangle is 20 feet. I see Neil's on the line and he can speak to that. So what we're showing here is the 20-foot trail easement, but I want to talk to you a little bit about why this site has sat vacant for 15 years. So this becomes the part of the parcel that, while it's not buildable for vertical structures, the trail can occupy it, and as Caitlin talked about, plazas could also occupy that. But this is a pretty good size chunk parcel. So 33% of the parcel really is not suitable for vertical building. And so then we have to fit a number of elements in here. So here's an element we have to fit, which is parking. So parking happens on the main floor and the entrance off of West Broadway. But remember, we have to meet those design excellence criteria for this building. And so there's office space, right, along the sidewalk on Broadway here and here, right? And then parking behind that. So we have a wonderful life on the street facade here that actually is office space. Here's our building footprint. So the building footprint stays 50 feet off the 100-year floodplain like we talked about. This is the 20-foot trail easement. We got a couple places we need to work with the City of Missoula, Parks and Rec, and the agencies that Caitlin mentioned on how we're going to get a trail through the topography in this area, right? And make it an appropriate width trail fit through this really constrained side of the property. But the trail is integral to the rezoning, and it's integral to the vision for the development of the property. So Carl Pozowitz is with me today, and I can turn this over so you can actually see his mug instead of mine. But here's his rendering of the site. And this is sort of a ghost of what the Riverfront Triangle was proposing, but it's a lot lighter now. We just couldn't make it lighter in the slide. So we have a main plaza area, life on the street. We're blessed. We have it on both sides. We have one in the river with the trail, and we also have it on West Broadway. So this is just a great building. It's got 2 fronts. It's wonderful. This is sort of a virtual drone concept of the building, and you can see the pedestrians and the lighting and the architectural feature proposed for the building, and the building stepbacks here, here, and up here. This is the West Broad view, and again, you can see the offices, which are so important to life on the street. I think the Stockman's Bank tried for that, but their windows into offices on the corner and then into a parking structure. What we're really trying to achieve here is some meaningful office space that fronts on Broadway. Stockman Bank is a beautiful building and a great use in downtown. And here's that drone view from the river, sort of above Silver Park and looking down to the nightlife along the river promenade and concrete city trail. That'll be 14 feet wide. Another shot looking towards the Orange Street Bridge. And yet another. And lastly, sort of perspective, it shows really the distance between this building and the first building you see over, which is the Sawyer over on this side, but for the Currents building. So this is the widest part of green space in downtown, is right across from this particular building. So we did some public involvement. We sent out mailings to neighbors. We weren't required to do that at all, but we did that. Then there's a planning board notification and hearing, and then of course the city council will provide notification for public participation. But I want you to give you a time frame, and I tried to do this with Heron's Landing, and I tried to impart to you that we had been in that process for 2 years, well in advance of even the idea of a Mullen Road area master plan. And so this one, we actually began this in the summer of 2019. We began planning and had our first initial meetings with development services. Mary did a great job, really thorough on the things we needed to do to dot our I's and cross our T's. And then in September 2019, exactly 1 year ago, 12 months ago, I applied for this rezoning application. There's been a lot of things that have happened. COVID-19 happened, a hiring freeze in the city happened, a huge burden on development services staff to try to meet the demand for all the developments coming away, and they're actually doing the best job they can do. And Caitlin and Mary have been wonderful. We had to do a floodplain assessment because the FEMA map actually was in error, so we get it correct on this one. And then here we are in September 2020 with you guys and the city council, and hopefully in 2021 or the summer, we'll look at some building permits. So Carl, did you want me to back up?
No, I'm just here for questions. So.
All right, so Mr. Chairman, members of the board, staff, thank you so much for taking the time to be here tonight and to listen to the city's presentation and ours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kaufman. Okay, are there any other presentations from staff or developer? Looks like a no. Okay, so with that, we'll move into the public comment portion of this hearing, and we will open the phone lines for people who would like to make a comment to the planning board on this rezoning request. If we could, Caitlin or Donna, or whoever, if you could put the phone number on the screen. Thank you very much. There we go. So for those of you who can't see it, the phone number to call in is 253-215-8782. And the meeting ID is 960-049-3694. So when you call in and are admitted to the meeting, please mute your TV or computer at that time, and staff will indicate to you when it is your time to comment. So with that, I will go on mute myself, and we will give it a few minutes for people to call in and make the comments. Okay, just a final check of staff. Is there anyone in the waiting room that you can see, or?
There is not. We have no public present for comment.
Okay, very good. Then we will close the public comment period and move into questions from planning board members, of staff, or the developer. If you raise your hand or just speak, if you raise your hand, we'll go in the order that I see them. So open the floor. David, looks like you've got a question.
Thank you,
Caroline.
Vince. I guess there's a combination comments and questions that the applicants and the staff can hopefully respond. CBD4 seems to be an appropriate district. So, you know, that and those types of uses make sense to me. What I have an issue with is the hard edge of the river. For instance, on finding 11, it says it defines the Clark Fork River, Missoula, as a defining feature. River's edge should be treated with care, and I don't see it being treated as a defining feature here. Second, the overall height in CBD makes sense when you're not on the river. Elsewhere within the CBD, that kind of height makes sense, not here, because if you're on the trail or even on the river, fishing or floating, you look up, it's more than 125 feet, but it's like about a 60-degree angle when I took the measurements myself to look up an extremely tall structure. We're making a very tall, hard edge to this part of town. So it's not an ordinary CBD4, and it's extremely constrained. I realize that, and you really don't have a lot of working room here. That's true, and it'll take a lot of creativity, and I know you guys have that, and we're able to do that. I have some base stabilization questions you might be able to answer, and the question about why the riverfront trail beyond 10-foot width is the responsibility of the city. So I want to put those out there to begin with. Start it. Thank you.
Thanks, David and staff. I guess multiple folks might want to weigh in here, but I'll leave it to you. Caitlin or Neil or Mary?
I'll start with the trail one if you guys want. I think the original special zoning district required a 10-foot wide trail. And so can you hear me all right, Dave? No?
We can hear you now.
You can? Okay. The original special zoning district required a 10-foot wide trail. Since then, the downtown master plan and some of the planning documents have changed and required a wider trail. And so we've kind of kept the required 10-foot wide trail as a part of the developer, and that we would, as the city, pay for any additional width. The change to concrete, the downtown master plan that we just adopted last year, the city and everyone, required up to 16 to 18 foot wide river promenade through here. And we realized that would severely constrain the site even more. And so I think in this area and through the drift parcel and the Fox Triangle parcel, that 14 foot would be an adequate width through here. 20-foot width on the easement is about as narrow as we can do with maintaining and snow removal and getting equipment in there. We chose to go with a concrete. We talked about doing a concrete just because of the longer lifespan and the reduced need to get back there with paving equipment in 15 years on the riverfront. So if there's any other questions.
Great. David, did you want to follow up with anything there, or did they answer?
Well, the follow-up to the city, I guess, is the rest of the city. Okay, so the city is now taking on, the Parks and Rec, I guess, taking on responsibility for additional cost above and beyond what people were thinking some years ago. Is that correct?
That was required years ago. Yeah, the original special zoning district for the riverfront triangle had a 10-foot wide trail listed. So we kept the same requirement on them but we have changed our plans to do a 14-foot wide trail. So we pay for
Okay,
additional width.
thanks.
Mary, you've got something to add?
I was just going to try to answer the piece about, height of buildings and all of that that Dave had asked. And essentially, with rezonings, they have to comply with the growth policy, and the current growth policy, the regional plan, is the 2035 Our Missoula Growth Policy. And that lists an urban center land use designation. The CBD4 is one of the zones that's currently relatable for lands with that designation. The other plan is the downtown master plan that was recently updated in 2019 and approved. And so that recommended, it really did not contradict in terms of uses and height and development, anything from the growth policy on it. It just added information about, continuation, high priorities, continuation of the Riverfront Trail. So in state law, standard, city zoning districts in Title 20 need to be the same, have the same standards wherever they are in the city. And CBD4 just happens to have, it has a 125-foot height limit. That's what was approved on the property directly to the east. And it complies with, it's a tight, constricted site. So I think Nick put it correctly in that you have this constrained site. The developer needs to fit some parking on it for its residents and uses, and compensate for the loss of the trail and the construction of the trail, their participation in that. And so the balance is in order to make it pencil, is getting some increased height. Certainly we haven't seen any projects even submitted on this site when it was under the Riverfront Triangle zoning, which had a 30-foot height within 50 feet of the river and 52 feet on the West Broadway side. So, I think the constraints of the current zoning just have forced that property to stay vacant for a long time. I don't think the developments are penciling there.
Thank you, Mary. Mr. Kaufman, you'd like to add to this? Please do.
If I could, thank you very much, Vince. So David, those are really good questions. And I can certainly go back and go on the slides, but I want you to, first I'm going to talk about the height of the structure. So I remember when I talked about the step backs of the building, and I talked about the building having two fronts, one on Broadway and one on the river. And those step back on the river side as well as the West Broadway side. So that's not a straight up vertical wall for that building. There are step backs on the river side as well as on the front side, and they're pretty important features. One of the things you asked about was the bank stabilization. We always consider that when we're doing development adjacent to the river. All the stuff that we have tells us that bank's stable, but that's a river, right? River runs through it. But I do want to talk about the visual acuity of the bank and the vegetation and the material that's there. So when we got this project, when Mr. Lentine talked to us about this, one of the exciting things we talked about was what we'd be able to do with that riverbank. And when we had our first meeting with Mary McCrae and her staff, a very long, thorough meeting, we talked about the treatments that we could use on that riverbank. And at that time, there was discussion that I believe the Missoula Redevelopment Agency, if not Parks and Recreation, and Neil would know if he's still here, has some funds to help participate in the design of the vegetation that would happen along that bank. So Kate Dinsmore, who's still on here tonight, I didn't know that I'd call on her to speak, but it's her expertise. Neil also is a landscape architect, so we're I think Neil would be excited to participate in just how that bank can be treated and better treated than the backside of buildings that we've seen for the last 100 years. I think that addresses your questions, David, between three of us.
Great, thank you very much. Nick. Okay, moving on. Next is Caroline.
Yes, thank you. A couple of questions. First, would the developer be open to paying for the full cost of the 14-foot bike path? Second is the decision for concrete. Are there other materials that have a lower embodied carbon for that still have similar maintenance requirements? Shane is really the expert on this. He's taught me a lot about embodied carbon over the last few months, but from what he's told me, I know we need to try to avoid concrete as much as possible. And then the third question, sorry, just to get them all out. Did the floodplain assessment include climate projections for increased spring flooding? And that's all of my questions right now.
Okay, who wants to take it? Mr. Kaufman, please.
So I'm left-handed, so I'll answer your last question first. So our floodplain division, we have about 4 certified floodplain managers, and Eric Anderson is an engineer and our engineer hydrologist specialist. So we've done a number of developments along the Clark Fork River downstream, more by Orchard Homes and some upstream. And what we always do is we look at the FEMA elevations, and we look at what actually happens during our events. And we've had several pretty large events over the last 10 years, and then we adjust for those. And so to answer your question, Caroline, in keeping with how WGM Group does flood assessments, we use the most contemporary data based on what's happening with the river, and not just relying on the FEMA requirements.
But it doesn't include projections from the Montana Climate Office about increased flooding that we are to be expecting in the next 30 years.
It may not.
Okay, thank you. Just clarifying that.
In regards to am I okay, Vince?
Yeah, please, Neil. I was gonna ask if someone could get at her first part of her.
Yeah, I think in response to concrete or asphalt, concrete, it just has a longer lifespan and holds up to the plowing. Asphalt has a lot of benefits as well, but it just has a shorter lifespan, like the 10 to 15 year, without a lot of maintenance. And with the constrained easement, that was kind of our thought process. We haven't found anything that holds up as long and in the conditions as concrete. We've kind of looked at a few options, but just haven't found anything that is easily maintained in snow and snow plowing and everything. So some places actually do that. I spent a lot of work in Boulder, and they actually do the paths and the shared use paths in concrete because of the longevity, and in some of those floodplains they're designed to flood so on the trail. So if there's Shane or Carolyn, if you want to chat offline on this and see if we can look at some options, and I would totally do some research, and I'm totally interested in that as well, but we just haven't found anything now that holds up to that use.
Nick?
So I have a question. Caitlin, in your presentation, we talked about asphalt, but I think in the way the condition is written, it specifies concrete.
Yeah, so it's similar to the how it switches from a 10-foot to 14-foot. So it's parks or the city taking the cost of upgrading to concrete, of upgrading to the wider trail. Does that make sense?
It does. Could I ask a question of Neil? So Neil, the whole purpose of the development agreement is so we can sit down with the city and come up with the best design for the occupation of the property and for the trail. Would you be willing in that development agreement conditions to open that up for the best surfacing? So it's not specified specifically as concrete?
I would, just with the constraints of the building and the easement width and the edge of the river. Yeah, I would be open to that.
And I like that idea. It provides flexibility, and maybe you guys already looked into this, but you know, so if we could move towards more permeable surfaces instead of, you know, concrete and asphalt and so on, like, and you know, I know we are in a lot of the parks with that granite, the decomposed granite type material. It sounds like what Nick's suggesting would allow for exploration of different options. And since it is so close to the river and stuff, I like that idea.
Great. Joshua, you have questions? And then Peter?
Sure. I just had a quick question, comment. Have you guys reached out to the Conservation District at all to get kind of their opinion on this? Any work, I believe, that would occur in that buffer area or setback, I think would be covered by 310 law. And so that would be their jurisdiction. You know, they may have some interesting perspective on what could be done in terms of bank stabilization and vegetation. So just a comment, I guess.
Peter, and then Neva or Mary, did you have something to add in response to a question? Oh, you're on mute.
I just wanted to add that at this point, we're focused on the rezone and including in the motion the requirement for a development agreement and a trail easement where the details can get worked out for that. And of course, all the permits that would need to be applied for as the project moves forward toward construction would have to be applied for and approved.
Okay. Ryan, do you have something further to add?
Thank you, Vince. I just wanted to answer Joshua's question, and we actually have. It was in regards to the Riverfront Triangle, the Fox site, and the Drift project. We met with the Conservation District, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and talked about the 310 permits. There's, as Nick pointed out, some significant topography between the Fox site and 601 West Broadway, so there's going to have to be some cooperation. And we had some really good meetings with those folks and those agencies in regards to what they'd want from a permitting standpoint.
Thank you, Ryan. Peter, you are up next, and then Neva, and then Shane.
I guess I'm thinking about the elevation. I would like to, I guess it's premature, but it would be nice to see an elevation map of what this building looks like on the riverfront. So I'm wondering, when you drive in to park there, are you driving downhill from Broadway into the building? And and based on where the basement is and how and how high it is, do we know of roughly how much higher than Broadway the building is?
Mr. Kaufman, you can answer this.
That's a question, Peter. And the building is no higher than Broadway. We have to get drainage, of course. So a 1/4 inch of fall per foot on the sidewalk is requisite to make sure that it melts and it drains off. The driveway in is at grade. You know,
I'm having trouble hearing you, Nick. I'm having a little trouble hearing you. Could you enunciate, or maybe your mic, get closer to your mic? Thank you.
Maybe in my excitement, I might have been covering my mic. Can you hear me now, Neva? So the driveway is at grade, but for the grade required for drainage. The building is not elevated. There's no 8% grade that goes up or down. There is no basement here, Peter. The building is at grade, and the sidewalk and the streetscape are importantly at the grade of Broadway on the front.
So Nick, there's not underground parking, or where does the parking go?
Parking is on first level, Vince. The parking happens on the first level. The offices are on the Broadway side to match up with the development standards category that we're in. We like that life on the street option, but there is no story below.
My question was sort of I'd like to hear the other board members' sort of feeling about the height. It doesn't necessarily bother me that we're looking at a 125-foot building, considering what's around it. But are there concerns that we should have about height, view? I don't know.
Well, my comments relate a little bit to that. I can imagine that a lot of Missoulians will say, egads, it's so tall, right by the river. However, I really believe that our solutions to protecting our landscape involve density. And I share the disappointment and I feel really sad for the folks that were pushing the Drift project because there's so many cool things about it. And you know, in terms of how they were thinking about labor and green building and integrating with the river. And so I appreciate that this project that is proposed tonight is also celebrating the river and is, you know, working with the site as best one can. And so my one question, maybe Nick, it's for you, they're related. So could some of that lower level, first level Broadway office space you were referring to, could any of that be like a food related business so that you'd have, with what you're proposing in the zoning, you know, so you'd have like a market on front kind of thing, a market on Broadway or whatever. Because I think there could be some real opportunity for that kind of business in that area and to serve the people who live or work there. And that's my second question. How much of this building do you anticipate would be residential versus commercial or office? Thank you.
Great. Nick.
Thank you, Neva. Those are really good questions. Peter kind of opened it up with questions about height. So Peter, you know where the senior living center is off of the east side of Orange Street? The existing senior living center, multiple story, that's as high as this building. That building has no step backs associated with it whatsoever, right?
Yeah.
This building is that height, but it has the step backs both on the riverfront side and on the Broadway side, which make it not only more attractive, but it lessens the impact of the building. I think Mary can talk about the importance of stacks. And then Neva, your question for food is that is a great idea. Hotels, motels, places where people live, they love to be able to go close to get food and to be on the front sidewalk of Broadway. Or even be on the riverfront side, I think would be a really good idea.
Or for the hospital folks, I mean, there seems like there's potential on that side of Orange for more food, restaurant services. Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Well, it's a corridor. It's where people pass. You know, it's becoming more and more of a corridor with Safeway, Fresh Market and Imagination Brewery down on that side. And your question was how much residential? 90% of that building is residential.
Ryan, did you have something to add in response to one of the questions, or has it been covered at this point?
No, it's been covered. I just wanted to mention that one reason we're not doing or proposing underground parking is in regards to bank stabilization. And if you can imagine a 12-foot deep hole there and shoring and whatnot. So we're being sensitive to the river from that standpoint, so.
Okay, thank you. So we've got Shane next and then David.
I guess my question is maybe for Mary or the development services team. Is there anything required in either one of these in the CBD zoning code or in the downtown or in the design excellence overlay that requires a certain depth of retail on the main floor of a building like this? I guess the question is related to the wedges that I'm seeing that appear to be very unusable space on the main floor. And I know Nick's statement about activating the street is 100% on. I love that. I have a hard time believing that it's going to happen in those areas, I suppose.
Mary, if you, and then Nick after Mary.
I'm hoping Caitlin is better versed with design excellence review. I don't think there's a requirement for retail per se, but there is a requirement for, frontage on the street that's active uses. So Caitlin, can you elaborate?
Yeah, so just like Mary said, the requirement isn't for what the use is, it's just an active use on the frontage of it. So if it were to be just a view into a parking garage off of Broadway, we would require things like screening or landscaping to really like activate that street. And it would be hard to get that approved. So a great solution for that is those commercial or office uses on that West Broadway, just to enhance the pedestrian experience is the goal of design excellence in that realm.
Nick. Nick, you're muted now.
There we go. How's that? So that's a great question, Shane. So these plans, if you were to try to put a percent plan on these, or these 5% plans, or these 10% plans, they're yield plans to see if we can make this work on this site. And I think your comment is great. And anything we can do to take care of those little kind of leftover spaces, which you take care of in the next percentage, a 30% plan or a 60 or 70% plan, I think need to be considered. Again, at the level of detail we have here, your comment is absolutely great. And it's something that needs to be considered as we move into the final plan. So there a parking space that can go away to make something on the front of that building work better. That'll happen in the next stage, but it's a really good comment. Thank you.
But there is no requirement for, if it is looking into parking, there would need to be screening. There's no requirement for a required depth of activity or anything like that. Is that correct?
No, that's correct for zoning code. There's no requirement.
Okay, thank you.
And this is Mary. It would be pretty difficult to get the parking garage directly on that street frontage approved through design excellence. It would be really difficult to meet the standards, any sort of standards to achieve that. So we were happy to see, knowing the balance between trying to provide some parking and having some active space fronting. I agree, they're kind of triangular spaces, and it'll be great to see this design evolve to make those more active as it moves forward.
Okay. Shane, is that?
Shane,
Nick, please.
One of the things Mary cautioned us on, Shane, at the pre-application meeting, that long, very thorough one, which I really appreciate because it gave us a strategy to dot I's and cross T's, and it was the design development criteria and how that first floor of that building needs to be addressed. So you're right, you're spot on. We're just not to that level of detail yet.
Okay, next is David, and then Stephanie and Caroline.
I just wanted to clarify, my point of view is the public view of the building from the river and the walkway. And how potentially intimidating that would be. I think the existing structure just on the other side of Orange, it was a bad example just because it's there. I think the city chose unwisely there, and the city should protect its riverfront. I'm not saying this is bad. I like the uses. I just think it's too close to the river and too intimidating. That's my point of view. And that's why I put it out there. Thank you.
Thanks for that, David. Stephanie?
Yeah, so just a couple of thoughts, and I'll try to be brief. I think I'm going to vote in favor of this, mostly because just looking at the thing that we're considering, which is the zoning, not necessarily the actual piece of property or the piece of building that's going to go on that zoning. I like the idea of basically getting rid of the special zoning district with this last fix of that piece of the zoning code. I know that that's been something the city's been trying to do for a long time. It feels like it's in line with the growth map and the growth policies. And I think it's important to remember that even though those other parcels that are next to it are currently sitting empty, they are zoned to be at that same height too. So even if we don't rezone this property, it seems like it's going to happen. And I understand and share the concerns about height. I think it's just a difference of my imagining of it. It seems like that, along with the promenade and the overall plan for this area, seems really great and cool. And you look at cities like Detroit that has the Detroit Riverwalk, and I know that it's much different than the situation in Missoula, but got big buildings right there and a really nice walking area, and it can create this really vibrant urban river atmosphere, which is really cool too, and a really special thing to have as well. So and I would just, not to get into food businesses, but I would definitely second that. I actually, Mr. Kaufman, work currently in the building that's right next to the Sawyer. So I work at the Natural History Center, which is the next building that you would get to across that big green expanse. And I would love somewhere to walk for lunch. So I think there's a lot of potential in reinvigorating that piece of property. And I'd love to see a bike trail through there. I think it would be a really good asset. So I appreciate the developers for coming with something that's going to work for what the city needs there.
Thanks, Stephanie. Caroline?
Stephanie, I agree. I'd also love to have a place to walk. I work right next to the Montana Natural History Museum, so that would be great. So you said the building is planned to be 90% residential. And I know it's preliminary, but as you're doing these yield designs to see what pencils, are those going to be higher end units, or what do you have in mind?
Nick or Ryan?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I just need to get all my technology squared away here. So that is the intention for this one is mixed income, Carol. I can't give you income parameters, but what the developer is proposing is for mixed income.
Okay, my question was a simple one for staff. You included the development agreement with the Fox Partners Group. I mean, was that just included as a example of what a development agreement would look like? I mean, this property owner is not a party to that in any way, correct?
Yes, that's correct. That was just for background on what the special zoning district has in the area, or had.
Okay, great. Caitlin or whoever, if you could put the recommended motion on the screen for us here. So staff has requested that we read the full text of the motion. I think I've heard in the discussion here today something of a consensus to revise the recommended motion to not specify concrete. If you could flip to the second part of that motion, Caitlin, it's pretty long. Sort of looking at this, I think in the sentence where it says, the city of Missoula's responsibility for the cost of upsizing the trail to a 14-foot wide concrete trail, I would think that just removing the word concrete would give the city of Missoula the flexibility to negotiate with the developer in that development agreement to specify the material used. So with that, I would take a motion from a member who's willing to read the full motion for all of us, either in the way that I suggested or something else entirely. Neva, I don't know.
No way, man.
Vince, can I ask another question?
Yes, please.
Okay. For the development agreement, so I think this got lost in my rapid fire of questions, but could someone explain more about why the developer is only going to pay for 10 feet of it, and would they be open to paying for the full cost of the trail? I feel like we are giving them a lot more profit margin with this upzoning. I agree that the height is good. I think we should develop it densely, but I also think that we should talk about them shouldering the full cost of that trail, since the development agreement is a part of our recommended motion.
Great. So Caitlin or Neil or Mary?
Neil, do you want to take this one again?
I think that's up to the developer and their clients to whether they'd want to pay for the more. I mean, we'd always support somebody paying for the more of the trail, but that was all that was required in the original zoning. So
Can I speak to that? I appreciate the spirit of what you're saying, Caroline. And at the same time, I think the developer is giving up some of their property to the trail, right? And there are places in the country where, planning boards have had to force people to put trails on their property. And this is pretty critical. It's a city, it's a value for the city. So while it would be great if they want to pay, I would personally not make that a condition of my vote, because we're all going to use it.
Yeah, okay, so maybe another clarifying question.
Saying it right or understanding. So go ahead.
Well, since you said they're giving up part of their property, but I think with this rezone, since they have to be 50 feet away from the 100-year floodplain, which is further back than where the trail is going, they're not with the rezone, they can't develop in that part of the property where the trail is anyway, if I'm understanding that correctly. So I don't think they're actually giving up the profit, that part of the property.
Sure. I'm not sure. Why? Maybe they could put a lawn there. I mean, they just have to have the setback, right? I mean, it's not that.
That's true. That's true. It's certainly, it's not that they are locked into paying for that portion of the trail. It's just that that's not a profit producing part of the property. That was my only point of clarification on your point, Eva.
And I wouldn't follow my sword either way on this. So maybe we should punt it to the developers and see how they're thinking about it. And maybe Nick would want to comment on how you think the cost of the trail and the width really figures into the project. Does that make sense? That's kind of what you're asking, right?
Yeah, Nick, if you have anything to add here, please do.
So when I talked about the time frame for this, we started in the summer. We didn't submit the application until the fall to take care of a lot of things. I think there's a great number of things that have gone into the thought process on the private and public side. And we got into a spot here where we are in agreement. And I would hate to see a project like this rise or fall based on who's paying for an extra 4 feet of trail. And I think that the development agreement that we put together and the parameters for it stand well.
Okay. I have a follow-up question on that, and sort of a general question for staff. I mean, Neil, you said that the 10-foot wide trail was required in the original zoning. Is that something that was specific to the Riverfront Triangle Special District? or is 10-foot trails still required citywide by default in other zoning districts?
No, not that I know of in other zoning districts. The 10-foot wide trail is in the original Riverfront Triangle Special Zoning District, and it is in the development agreement for the Fox Triangle Special Zoning District. Part of the Drift property, or what was formerly known as Drift property, whatever it is now, is a parkland owned by Parks, but the trail would be the responsibility of that project. This is an urban renewal district, so there are urban renewal funds available, depending on when this falls in with the other projects. And transportation impact fees are a source of funding. So there is multiple funding sources available, not just parks but that's why it's broad in the city. And I think we can make an agreement with the developer and however that happens.
And so is it sort of staff's understanding that this arrangement here with the additional 4 feet being paid for by the city of Missoula, is it your understanding that that will be the model for the remaining parcels moving east to Orange Street in this area?
In my opinion, the Fox Triangle land use agreement, development agreement was already approved prior to the adoption of the downtown master plan, which required a wider or suggested a wider promenade. I believe the AASHTO, which is the guidelines that kind of not regulate, but suggest the best practices for shared use paths and bicycle facilities, are updating their plans. Right now, 10-foot wide is the minimum width, and that doesn't factor in like an urban core, which this is. And so I think their minimum width in an urban setting is going to go up to a 14, is what I heard rumor of. So that's where kind of the 14 comes in. The downtown master plan calls for a 18 to 20-foot promenade. That's what we're going to try to do through the Caris Park section, at East Caris, Best Read, where we can. Obviously, the Clark Fork Manor is right on the river, like as was mentioned before. But I think the 14 is kind of where we've kind of landed with the limited space over here. That in that 20-foot easement also has to have lighting and benches, trash receptacles, all these amenities in that 20-foot easement. When you factor in 14 foot of trail, 2 foot of shoulders on each side, and then lights, that's chewing up all your available width. So
okay. Thanks, Neil. That makes sense to me. And I'm looking at the development agreement. It is 10 feet in the riverfront triangle. And just to put perspective, Neil, you would probably know the answer to this question offhand. What is the width of the trail just east of Orange Street?
It varies from 8 to 10. Anything in Caris Park is 10. There are some sections that kind of based on paving at the time may be down lower to 8, but sometimes it's up to 11, but we try to get 10 in there.
It's plenty. It's plenty.
It seems like it. Mary, did you want to add to this? You had your hand raised for a minute there.
No, I think Neil covered it all. But as someone who walks the Riverfront Trail a lot, for my mindfulness meditation in my sometimes stressful day job, I can tell you that 10 feet is not enough. Regularly, I get brushed by bicycles with my headphones on just because the trail's real crowded with people walking in both directions and bikes trying to commute on it. And so, it's a really well-used trail by a lot of people in Missoula. It's a real gift that we have in the city. So I think widening it to plan for even more people using the trail is probably a good idea.
Okay,
Great,
I
thanks,
didn't mean
Mary.
to be so flippant about that. I just, you know, I just think I think it's something the city should be willing to invest in. And the developers are putting in part of it. And if we're taking seriously this admonition to focus inward, I mean, I know there's going to be people who hate this, hate seeing a taller building along the river. But you know what? I hate seeing the farmland being paved over. And so we can't do it. We can't have it all. And I like this. I like this project. I think this is well designed for the weird space. And I'm fine with the city paying a little more to widen it so that, you know, Mary can like do her walking meditation and we can all be healthy. I mean, that's really what we want too, right? We want a healthy community and places for people to walk, and the developers are providing that. And the city is saying it's willing to pony up too. So I think it's fine. Personally.
Thanks, Neva. Shane, you have your hand up, and then Stephanie, I think you put your hand up again. Shane?
Yeah. So I guess I wanted to echo what Mary said. First of all, 10 feet isn't wide enough in my view. And I've worked extensively with Neil and Donna at Parks on some parts of the trail. And I think that it's really important that we do provide adequate, I think the 20-foot easement is probably good enough, and whatever they can build in there will probably suffice. I'm wondering, I'm just trying to think through loopholes in this whole thing and like making sure that the surfacing is consistent on that trail. And we specify that the developer needs to build a trail, and we're potentially striking the section about the city paying for the extra 4 feet of concrete trail, or, you know, or like at least the concrete section of that. Should there be language in there that indicates that they need to be developed in tandem of the same material so that it is all cohesive and put together? I guess the way that I could see this playing out is the developer goes in there and puts in a 10-foot wide trail, and then there's just 2-foot strips put on either side of it that are concrete that don't quite match up and are just slightly a nightmare. And I'm wondering if we just need to be consistent about materials within that, and either add or subtract language in both parts of the trail conversation in this to make sure that it's of the same material no matter what it is.
Mary, you want to start?
Yes, so I think the development agreement will outline the construction of the trail, and you know what this motion is intended to provide are some guidelines that the developer will be responsible for the cost of 10 feet of perhaps an asphalt trail, what that would cost, and the city will pay for an additional 14 feet and any difference in cost between asphalt and the material that is actually built out of. But there's no intention to have the builder construct a 10-foot trail, then the city add on to it later. The trail will be built at one time. And it's just more a guideline for kind of what would be included in this development agreement, and you know, an outline of who would be responsible for what.
Okay, thank you.
Neil, looks like you don't have anything to add.
Rapid fire muting. Mary covered it. I think most likely the developer will probably build the trail at the time of construction of the building. Just it would be the cheapest and most economical way to do that, and we contribute in that sense.
And as a follow-on, I mean, are you confident as staff that there'll be continuity with whatever's built to the east, even though the development agreement is going to be slightly different?
I do, for the fact that it's in an urban renewal district and for the MRA to use the funds, that they have some ability to leverage those funds to get what we all, I think, agree to on that.
That makes sense. Okay, Stephanie?
Just one quick clarification, and it's probably because I just don't know this particular element of code, but if we didn't rezone and by some miracle something penciled out and they were able to build something on this, and so that 10-foot trail got built under the special zoning district, whose responsibility would the cost of maintenance and upkeep be on it? Would that still be the city's responsibility, or that would be ours? I still think it's totally worth doing. I just feel like in due diligence, I'm curious about who would have done it under the old zoning district in terms of the maintenance cost, not the actual construction cost.
Good question.
It would be Parks and Rec. It'd be a 20-foot easement, public access easement. It would be part of the riverfront trail and it would just be maintained with the rest of it.
So Parks and Rec maintains all of the riverfront trail, regardless of how that got established or got easemented or built. The Parks and Rec pays to maintain all of that.
Yeah, the public pays taxpayer dollars that we then maintain.
Yes, thank you. Perfect. Thanks so much.
You all fund us, so yes.
Good point. I guess the only thing I would just add, I do hear where you're coming from, Carolyn, in terms of the value that they're getting out of the additional height and making this a profitable property. I guess I would just add that in addition to, where they can't build in that 50-foot area, they do, without the easement, would have the right to exclude others from that, which is that's a valuable right in and of itself. And so I do think that it's important to recognize that. And I'm excited about the spec trail, so I hope that they're able to build it and make this property happen.
Great. Caroline, is your hand up from before, or do you have some more questions?
No, I have one more question about the trail. Neil, just ballpark figure, what is the amount of money we're thinking about that's the difference between a 14-foot trail and a 10-foot trail? That'll help me conceptualizing. And also, Stephanie, totally agree, the easement provides a ton of value.
No, Ryan or Nick, have you guys done a cost estimate for a while on concrete versus asphalt? We haven't built a concrete trail besides sidewalks. Asphalt's the cheapest material. We have since changed our asphalt section, so it's a little more durable and costs a little more, but it's still a little cheaper than asphalt or than concrete.
Ryan.
If I may add, Caroline, the only thing I do know, like Neil said, we haven't done a cost comparison, but what we find oftentimes, and this is more in regards to 5 and 6 foot wide asphalt trails, is they're not necessarily that much cheaper than concrete because paving equipment's designed for roads and 12-foot swaths. And when you go to narrower swaths, you're pouring the wider swath and then cutting it back. So sometimes the concrete pencils out to be pretty darn close and not that much more expensive than an asphalt trail.
Okay, so the difference, what Parks and Rec is gonna kick in to make this a 14-foot trail, whether it's concrete or something else, is what I'm taking is sort of a negligible amount of money, or is it like $50,000? That's what I'm trying to get a sense of, is how much is Parks and Rec gonna be putting into providing this trail?
I think it will be the city, so it would be a combination of, like I mentioned before, like probably urban renewal district.
Sorry,
park.
yes, yeah.
No, there's like park impact fees for developing parcels, so some of those may go into this in the downtown area. Transportation impact fees, since this will be kind of a transportation corridor as well, can be used in here. I do think it's in probably, it's not negligible, but like it's not gonna break the bank. And it will be something that will be like a 30-year lifespan as opposed to a 15-year lifespan. So our long-term maintenance costs will actually go down over time. Then, replacing or doing, some of this path maintenance, pavement preservation type activities. So long-term, it will cost cheaper.
Caroline, we don't have a number there, but are you satisfied with the?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
All right, Peter, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm willing to make a motion.
Oh no.
And read through it all. If I could have a recommendation, if I could have a recommendation from either Karen or Mary on a word to use or several words to use in place of concrete.
I think I would just eliminate the word concrete in that phrase and call it a 14-foot wide trail. And the requirement for the development agreement can work out the details of the specific material for that trail.
Okay.
Does that work for you, Neil?
Okay. Then I'll start reading, and then when I get to the end of the first page, will you change for me?
Thank you,
I
Peter.
make the motion that the planning board approve the adoption of an ordinance to rezone property located at 601 West Broadway and legally described as lots A, B, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the east half of lot 6 in block 51 and lots 48 and 49 in block 56 of W.J. McCormick's addition in section 21, township 13 north, range 19 west, from special district SD/Riverfront Triangle, subdistrict D to CBD 4, central business district /DE-D, outer core design excellence downtown overlay, subject to the applicant and the city executing a development agreement and public non-motorized access easement filed with the county clerk and recorder prior to the effective date of the ordinance, which is 120 days from city council approval. The development agreement shall include construction of the riverfront trail along the north shore of the Clark Fork River from east to west, connecting to West Broadway on the west end and to the riverfront trail on property adjacent to the east without interruption or detour. The developer's responsibility for the cost of a minimum 10-foot wide trail with 1-foot shoulders on either side of the path, the city of Missoula's responsibility for the cost of upsizing the trail to a 14-foot wide trail, the city of Missoula's responsibility for repair, maintenance, and replacement of the trail once constructed, and a 20-foot wide public non-motorized access easement filed with the development agreement. Design of the riverfront trail and any variation from the standards, including easement width, surface width of the trail, lighting, provision for trash receptacles and benches, shall be specific to the site and approved by City Parks and Recreation. A
Very
hand
nice,
of
Peter.
applause
Thank
would
you.
be appreciated. Thank you. Thank you.
Well done, Peter. I second his motion.
Wonderful. Okay. So I think we'll do a voice vote on this. If it's not clear what the determination is, we can go to a roll call. Actually, no, there's discussion. I'm sorry. I'm jumping the gun here. So at this point, would anyone like to say anything more on this, Neva?
Well, I just like to say I'm going to vote in favor of this, even though I know there are a lot of Missoulians that'll react to the height right along the river. This is the right thing to do. We need to encourage development downtown, and so I'm happy to support this. And the one caveat I want to make is that I'm not an engineer, so I'm really hoping that the folks who have decided that this is not too close to the river are right. In other words, I would really hate, like, for 25 years from now for this whole thing to be taken out by a big flood. So I'm trusting that they're right. I can't do anything else because I really don't know, but I think that the river deserves the kind of attention in a way that this project will give, that the Drift project would have given as well. So I will be supporting this.
Neva. I'll be supporting this as well. I agree with you, Neva, and others. You know, I think folks are generally in the community. Some of them are going to have an immediate reaction to the density and the height, especially if this develops as one of the first properties in the riverfront triangle to develop, which at this point it looks like it might be. But, you know, considering everything that we do week in and week out here, I think you've got it right, Neva. I mean, this is where the concentration of city services are, with transportation and trails and access to grocery stores, everything else, the ability to live without a car. So I think the density, this is our central business district, and the height, you know, I'd like to see more in the future, a discussion in some way of view sheds. You know, I don't know too much about the topic myself. It seems extremely site specific and not something that you can just do sort of on the fly. But you know, I think the point was made tonight. You know, what's important to realize with this particular rezoning is, even though there's nothing around the site right now, and the buildings at most are a few stories high, everything to the east here has been zoned to the same zoning. So buildings are going to be tall here, and it was really helpful to hear a comparison. The fact that the height will be about the height of the apartment building on the east side of Orange Street. I don't, you know, have any personal complaints about that one myself. So I guess the only other point I'd make is, you know, it's nice to see the development agreement in this way. I think it's a good model. It's been a good model in some of the more tricky and complicated developments to ensure that the public gets a benefit, a significant benefit from the development. And, you know, while I share Caroline's desire, it would have been nice to see the developer pay for the whole trail. You know, I trust that staff started the negotiation from that point, and it seems fair given the agreement to the east for a 10-foot path. So that's all I have to say. I'll support this and move on. I guess I see a bunch of hands here. Stephanie and Caroline, then Shane.
I think that was an old hand. I have nothing else to add, but I have an.
Oh, okay.
You're an old hand?
I'll jump in and answer her question. I think I just looked at the old cost estimate, and it was from a couple of years ago, but it was $4 more per square foot to go to concrete than asphalt. And so I may have just tried to remember numbers that Nick gave, about 280 feet in length down the back property line and 60-ish along the side, and may have come up with a number of like 20,000. But I did that on the fly, and I'm not.
I really appreciate that back
Yeah.
of the envelope, Matt. So
I mean,
thank
it
you
could
very
be, I
much.
could have had a decimal in the wrong spot because I haven't turned on my light yet. So.
Well, thanks, Neil. Caroline, do you want to make a final comment? Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to, the reason I was kind of going in depth so much on the path is I'm going to support this project. I think it's right to have the density here. I find this decision a lot easier than a lot of our subdivision developments that are sort of on our fringe. But the reason I was thinking about that path so much was, you know, developers are capitalizing on a ton of value that is in Missoula right now. And we are really limited in what we can ask them to do. We are behind a lot of cities and states that have affordable housing crises. We don't have inclusionary zoning. We don't really have methods where we can require them to provide a certain number of affordable housing units. And so just kind of thinking, well, maybe they can provide the trail if we, in this development agreement, we can't have them do other things legally. But now that I know it's like $20,000, it's not as much of a sticking point. But I do feel protective over the value that's in Missoula right now. And I know it's great to have this property developed. Again, I'm going to support it, but I also hope we can all think creatively about making sure we're not just having developers capture that income and that they're also providing services that we need so badly. So that's all for me.
Great point.
Shane, want to make a final comment?
Sure. I will also be supporting this. I think it's a great project. Just a few points that I'd like the developer to consider moving forward. I've already mentioned some of them. I guess maybe first of all, Neil, I pretty much agree with your back of the napkin analysis of that. I came up with about the same number. I'm wondering if the developer will engage with a true somebody who knows how to repair riparian areas adjacent to a river. We've done similar projects at where Liberty Lanes used to be at the Solstice and the Confluence, where we went in and really repaired that riverbank. And I think that that some outside consulting on that really helped our design of that project. So I encourage you to not just use folks in-house, but also reach out and make sure that we're using the best of the best to repair that as best we can. I can't stress enough that I really believe in activating the street, and I would really like to see the next generation of this schematic design really look to create active spaces and not just lobbies for for the residents up above. You know, I'd like to see activity in there and like to see life in there as much as we possibly can. And believe that that was it. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, we will now go through the vote. We'll do a voice vote in this case. It looks like that'll be sufficient. If it's not clear, we will do a roll call. So before we do that, Caitlin, if you could put the motion back on the screen. I'm not going to read it again, but just.
Actually, I was wondering if Peter could read it again.
I'm not sure how to respond to that, my dear colleague.
Just leave out concrete.
Yeah.
Peter, just say no.
No.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second, right?
We do have a motion and a second, and half the motion is on the screen. We can recall Peter's wonderful voicing of this motion. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed, same sign.
No.
Okay, we have one no. The motion passes. Okay, thank you very much, everybody who presented tonight, and all the planning board members for lots of really great questions. Okay. Next on tonight's agenda, we have communications and special presentations, of which I don't believe there are any. So Karen's shaking her head no. Sounds good. Next is committee reports. Do we have any reports from members who serve on committees?
Transportation's next meeting will be, I think it's the 17th. There's a small chance that I will not be able to attend, so I may seek a substitute from somebody. It's a Zoom meeting at 2 in the afternoon, but I'll send out an email depending on when it's set.
Okay, great. I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, Karen or staff, I mean, that sounds like something that's appropriate for email communication, right? Okay.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Great, thanks, Peter. And other business, we have no old business tonight. New business and referrals, there's no new business. I've got comments from planning board members. Would anyone like to make a comment on anything at all?
Yeah, I would.
Sean.
I guess to start with, I am kind of curious how many members of the planning board got an opportunity to read the comments that were sent in. I don't remember the date now and I don't have the email up, but sometime over the weekend regarding the Huron Landing subdivision, and to review those comments and specifically the meeting minutes, as well as I believe it's an email. I'm going to bring those up here in a second, but an email regarding lot size and whatnot.
I just skimmed it and looked at the beginning, so I would welcome an explanation. If you were able to go deeper into it, I just didn't have the time.
Yeah, I read through them, and I think I kind of see what the issue is, but I'm sort of curious to hear what your take on it was, Sean. And then also, it does look like we have Nick and staff here, kind of what their interpretation is of it as well.
Anybody else get a chance to look it over?
Yeah, I read them as well. I'm also curious about other folks' thoughts. I really have nothing additional to share. I did read them through though.
I also read them.
Yeah, as did I. I thought the meeting minutes with the WGM letterhead, I was kind of curious about, as they did have the half-acre lot note, but I could be misunderstanding things.
Yeah, yeah, the meeting minutes seem to identify the question around half-acre lots. That to me is a little more vague, but the email from 2005 seems very specific about 2 dwelling units per acre. And I mean, like, I don't necessarily know like what's, like legally binding in these things, which is why one of the reasons why I really appreciated David's comments, as far as like, I think this falls on staff to find these things and identify this when they're fleshing them out for us. But I was frustrated, to say the least, to see this come in after we had that meeting, and see this email in specific that is, like specifically identifying requirement of 2 dwelling units per acre. And then, having these citizens that live out on 44 ranch estates, pointing that out, and then having that being said, that's not the case. So I don't know. I guess I was just really frustrated by that, and feeling a bit misled about the reality of that, or what was being told to these folks, because they were right, like they were accurate. And from what I can tell, and that's another question I have, do the other folks that had an opportunity to look at that feel like the residents were correct in their assertion? Because that's what I'm taking from this information.
I mean, the way I read it, Sean, was, I guess first of all, with regards to the timing, I mean, I think we heard from staff tonight that it's pretty common for a project like this that goes on through multiple public meetings over a long period of time for public comments to come in after meetings. And so the emails we got from Mr. Maynard, they were after the meeting. They had made mention to this 2005 email in the meeting, but it wasn't included as far as I could tell in the packet that we had for the meeting. But the way I read it was just, the 2005 email, which is a long time ago. But, granted, what's said is said. It sounded to me like Mr. Kaufman was just simply referencing the existing zoning at that time. And what we were asked to recommend on last meeting was to change the zoning. So it didn't, I can understand how it would be interpreted in the way that clearly the neighbors are, but, from my standpoint, we were considering a change in the zoning at the last meeting, and that was the issue on the table. So that's the way I read it. Nick, since you're here, it would be nice to hear your perspective if you're willing.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Can I show you guys a slideshow? And thank you, Sean, for bringing this up, because I think there have been some misrepresentations, and I think we have to go back and look at the history and read the email. So if I could bring up the slideshow, I'd appreciate.
Do you have access, Nick, or do you need staff to give that to you?
Yeah, I need it. I guess I do need that. Hang on.
Caitlin or others, if we could give that to Nick, I think it's appropriate.
Let me know when if you can see it.
I'm still just seeing your face here.
Just a sec here. Just a second. That's the other slideshow. I apologize.
That is coming up on our screens, Nick. We can see the other slideshow.
Right. So this is the one. It starts out with this one, documented representations over the course of 44 Ranch. Can you see that one?
No, we're still in your PowerPoint, Nick.
Okay. Anybody have any technological?
I'd recommend if you stop sharing the screen and then you share it again, you'll probably have an option to choose each individual windows on your desktop or your whole desktop.
Yeah. It seems like I don't have the menu bar down below.
You could do a screenshot and throw it into your PowerPoint if that's the best option. I don't know.
While Nick figures
Or
this
you
out,
could email
I'd make
it to you.
one comment I would make, and I'm reminded of a meeting that we had last year where a member of the community accused the planning board, not the developer, but similar situation, for making promises that we would never change the zoning around.
Peter, we lost you. Your sound here. Now you're back.
Can you hear me? Okay.
I can.
We had made promises that this planning board had made promises not to change the zoning near her, and that she and all her cohort had purchased the land in 2-acre lots so they could have horse farms out there. And had we never read the covenant? And we had an interesting conversation about whether covenants had any bearing in what we do on the planning board and the legal ramifications of agreements made by interested parties. And the fact of the matter is, we are not obliged to listen to or pay attention to covenants. It is up to an individual to sue the city or the county after the fact. I guess I'd like some clarification from Karen. And I know that at some point, I think it would be valuable for us as a group to hear about who says what when, and when is it legal, when does it have ramifications, and when doesn't it?
Well, I guess there's possibly two pieces of that. One is kind of the covenants question, and then there's more generally who says what, where, when. I think everyone tries to put their best foot forward, and credibility is really important for staff, for developers reps, and for others to, and that doesn't mean that mistakes aren't made, but I don't think anyone intentionally tries to mislead the planning board or any other public body, at least among the people that I've worked with over time. It does, it maybe happens unintentionally periodically, and that's something that probably will happen. Mistakes probably will be made. Members of the public, who come and speak to you, I don't think anyone intentionally misrepresents positions either, but they don't have as many facts available to them, so they speak from their perspective. So you just kind of have to take that into account. The staff knows what staff knows, the developers rep knows what they know, agencies know what they know, members of the public know what they know, and it's hard, but the planning board has to kind of filter that stuff out and figure out what's critical to your decision-making process, and then kind of dive into that. And there is going to be some information that maybe isn't critical to your decision-making process, and you have to kind of learn to filter that stuff out. And there is a credibility piece where, like, if you feel like someone that you're dealing with makes misrepresentations periodically, maybe having a conversation with them. But I don't know of any member of staff, development community in Missoula, agencies, who intentionally would ever do that. All of us pay a lot of attention to our credibility. So hopefully you know that. And
none of my remarks refer to that.
Yeah,
I take your point.
Members of the staff or members of the public will, they're kind of coming into almost a blind process. They're only coming in for that one thing and commenting on that one thing. So they're coming at it from a different interest. They have their particular interests and their particular perspective that they're trying to convey to the planning board. And you have to kind of filter out what of that is important to you and what is really critical.
I think your point is well taken, Karen, but mine is more general. And I want to just underscore the fact that I think it would be valuable for us to understand some of the legal ramifications of these conversations. When is a covenant important, and who are the bodies that it's important to? What does zoning mean, as a legal recourse? And if I don't like the zoning, then I can go to court and fight it. So those kind of aspects, I think, are important for us to consider at some point.
Okay. So a growth policy designation is a policy designation that sets a guide as to what is appropriate for land use. A subdivision proposal is a land use development proposal that creates lots and blocks and tracks and roads and things like that. It is a legal land development issue. The planning board provides a recommendation on those. A zoning action is a set of rules that guides the use and development of lots or of parcels in a community. They are the rule of law, and changes to them are done through rezoning processes or challenging a zoning process, which is done either through challenging the governing body's decision or going through a court of law. A covenant is an agreement amongst the people that are bound to it. And it depends on each covenant as to who are the individuals that are connected to it. Sometimes a city or county could be connected to it. More commonly, they are agreements among private property owners.
Thanks, Karen. I thought that was a great treatment of the issue generally. And, Peter, I think if there's still questions, I think I understand what you're coming from. I mean, this does come up from time to time with us, and there's a lot of different parties and agreements between them, and sometimes difficult to understand what supersedes what. But
yeah,
maybe it's something that if it keeps coming up, we can work with staff to maybe get a more full treatment in the future.
Thank you, Vince. I think that is my issue here.
Okay.
And though I do appreciate, Karen, your quick summary of it. I think it's due a more detailed presentation and explanation and consideration by us.
Yeah, absolutely, Peter. Thank you. Neva, you had your hand up there. Did you want to add something?
I really appreciate what Peter's saying, and I'm not, to be honest, I'd been so busy with the start of the semester, I didn't really have a chance to weigh into or read into those comments that came in. So I'm gathering that the residents of 44 Ranch are saying that in the covenant that they agreed to when the original subdivision was created, that they're understanding that the neighbors would develop into half-acre lots. I'm not really clear what the issue here is, and I want to understand exactly what the concern is. So
let's let Nick, why don't we let Nick give his side of the story here? I think all we really have are the emails, not having the people who wrote the emails.
In 2005, their references to when the original 44 ranch was created, right?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Nick.
So, can you see my screen, Vince?
Yep.
Yeah, help us.
Here we go. So this is 2002. In 2002, 44 ranch estates existed right here. 1 acre tracts, individual wells, septic tanks, and drain fields. This road called Roundup Drive was built to access this subdivision. The Mitty family did this subdivision. Gordon Sorensen was the engineer who took it through the process, but some of the engineering design on it. What's really important is to see the location of Roundup Drive and to know that north is north up here, and east is here, and west is there, and that is Roundup Drive. So when we were doing the subdivision, the neighbors had some concerns, and what we tried to do was to address those concerns. So instead of leaving Roundup Drive as a major north-south collector street, we proposed a new collector east of and parallel to Roundup Drive. You know that today as Chuckwagon because it's built, right? But at the time of the email in 2005, we were working to listen to the neighbors and do the best job we could. And we proposed a new collector street so that Roundup would be a local street for the folks that own lots in 44 Ranch Estates, the 1 acre tracts. We increased the minimum lot size by 10% to 4,400 square feet. I'm sorry about the misspelling on the comma there. The average lot size then became 6,000 square feet. The neighbors had asked for 5,400 and we exceeded that. We agreed to phase the development from east, from George Elmer Drive on the east to the west, so that construction and building of homes would not affect 44 Ranch Estates until later phases. And then we agreed that lots adjacent to 44 Ranch Estates to the north and west, which were the sides of our preliminary plat, would be larger lots. And so we were working this out when I sent the email of 2005. These were the concessions we were making, what we heard from the folks in 44 Ranch. This just shows you a phasing plan from the air photo. This is Roundup Drive right here. And this is the new collector street right here. This is Roundup Drive. This is the new collector street. This is George Elmer. This over here is east. This over here is west. West of Roundup is over here. East of Roundup is there. There was
Nick,
no.
could you go back? Could you locate for us on this image where the Heron's Landing is?
Yeah, that would be great.
Heron's Landing is approximately in this location right here.
Okay.
But doesn't it cross George Elmer?
No, and this side too. Thank you, Neva. It goes across George Elmer this way and back across that way. Roughly that area right there.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, great question. So there were no additional preliminary plat requiring the larger lots that we offered, but this is a snip of the final plat for phase 8 of 44 Ranch Estates. This recorded final plat, right? And this shows you that we created 20,000 square foot lots along the north. We haven't done the phase over to the west yet, right? And where did we start our phase? We started it over at George Elmer on the east side and moved this way. And did we increase the lot sizes? Yes, we did. We did everything we said we were going to do. This is the email. And this is from Nick Kaufman, and it's sent to Steve King, who's a city engineer, Dale McCormick, who was the planner at Development Services, rest his soul, he passed away recently. And to-
No way, he did?
He did, about a month ago. He had a heart attack on a Friday.
Dale did? Oh, I'm
Dale
so
did.
sorry. Okay.
This was
sorry.
also sent to
In-
Rick Booth at Rick's Auto Body, who lives in 44 Ranch Estates, to Richard and Joyce Dombrowski, who live in 44 Ranch Estates, and then Kevin Mitty, who was the representative from Shelter West. So let's read the email. Let's just read the email, okay? So since the hearing Monday evening, we've been working hard to accommodate some of the concerns raised. Here are our thoughts. Mike Flynn and his sisters have agreed to provide right-of-way for a new collector road east of and parallel to Roundup Drive. The land is in the sole ownership of Catherine R. Flynn Family Limited Partnership. Do you see anything in that sentence that tells you that I was working for Mike Flynn or the KR Flynn Family Partnership? Because what I told you at the planning board meeting was that I was not. And what this email says is we're working hard to get that new collector street, and Mike Flynn and the sisters, right, have agreed to provide right-of-way for that parallel new street. This concession is made with the condition that the proposed subdivision is approved and Shelter West constructs the new road. The new road would have to be a bit curvilinear alignment to allow 2 rows of lots between Roundup Drive and the new collector. All right, those rows of lots, ladies and gentlemen, between Roundup Drive and the collector are east of Roundup Drive, correct?
Nick, could I ask a question here?
Sure.
Did
Absolutely.
Mike Flynn, did they own the original 44 Ranch Estates as well, or is this a new party
They owned a
to
portion
the
of
agreement
it.
entirely?
They owned a portion of it, Vince, and the Middies owned a ranch out there too, and then Middies purchased some more land from Flynn's.
Okay.
Okay. All right. The new road would have a bit of a curvilinear alignment around 2 of lots between Roundup Drive and the new collector. Lots adjacent to Roundup Drive on the west. Let me reread that. Lots adjacent to Roundup Drive on the west would of course meet the density requirement of 2 dwelling units per acre. This email talks about the area west of Roundup Drive, not the area east of Roundup Drive. This is really important that you can read this and understand what I'm saying. Lots adjacent to Roundup Drive on the west would of course meet density requirements of 2 dwelling units per acre. This new alignment would have to receive approval from the appropriate reviewing agencies. And then this goes on because this is a cordial letter to the folks at 44 Ranch Estates in terms of what we're trying to accommodate in terms of their concerns raised during the hearings. In addition, we'll be increasing the maximum lot size and zoning and on the plat to a minimum lot size of 4,400 square feet. This is an increase of minimum lot size of 10%. The email goes on. The suggestion was to make the lots 5,400 square feet. There are 75.38 acres of allotted area. There are 545 lots. That's the average size. It's just over 6,000 square feet. So we exceeded their request. We will still phase the project from east so that the existing in 44 Ranch Estates will not have any development adjacent to them until the latest phases of the project, if the entire project can be approved. So here's another picture for you. Here's Roundup Drive. Where's the area west of Roundup Drive? It's over here. Where's the area east of Roundup Drive? It's over here. Where's the subdivision we were talking about a week ago? It's over here. All of it, every bit of it is east of Roundup Drive, both sides of George Elmer. And Neva, you're absolutely correct about that. But I want to go back to the email because it's so easy for people to get something and not read it, right? And this email says nothing about WGM Group working for the Flynn's, and it makes no representation for lot sizes east of Roundup Drive. All right, that was in 2005. In 2016, plans change. Just a second. So this is a illustration of what 44 Ranch looks like. This is 44 Ranch Estates. You see the large lots, right? See where this road starts over here to become what is now Chuckwagon and at Easterly and parallel Collector Street, and see Roundup Drive, and this is west and this is east. There's the phasing again. So on July 19th in 2017, we had a neighborhood meeting, invited all the folks from 44 Ranch Estates. And this is the development we were proposing. This is the area west of Roundup Drive right here, right? Since between 2005 and 2017, which is 12 years, we had a new growth policy. Sean, I sat on you on a committee for that 2015 growth policy. We worked together side by side on that. And that called for higher density here. And the middies felt that it was appropriate to propose higher density. This was brought to the folks at 40 Ranch in 2017. Does it indicate that plans have changed? Were they notified that plans were changed? Absolutely, they were notified. Here's another illustration of those development. We brought this forth to the City Council for annexation and rezoning to RT 5.4, which is single family and two family homes at 5,400 square feet. The planning board, the staff came up with conditions 10 minutes before our LUP meeting, and we withdrew our request. But the point in fact is our plans changed. We made the neighborhood aware of it before we applied for the annexation and rezoning. Here's the proposed development. And so the only thing I can say to each and every one of you is we come into this world with our integrity, right, and our soul. And I'm a developer's representative. And because of the work I do, all those folks in 44 Ranch have homes, right? Because of the work I do, thousands of people in this community have homes, and we have never done a project that's contrary to the growth policy, and we've been upfront on everything. I was called a liar at that planning board meeting. And then basically the email you got reaffirmed that I was a liar on the basis of an email that documented what we were trying to do to improve and to listen to the folks in 44 Ranch Estates. And if we need to back up and read that email, let's back up it. Because something was misrepresented at the planning board meeting. It was not anything that WGM Group said.
Yeah, and if I could just respond here for a second, Vince. And I want to respond to like Nick and Karen. Like, my frustration is definitely not that someone was trying to mislead folks. You know, I absolutely believe in that people always tend to put their best foot forward more often than not, particularly in these types of situations. My frustration came from not having the explanation that we just got to address these concerns that these folks had. Because I'll be honest, it took me a while to notice that section on the west side. And then it took me a while because Google Maps isn't up to date to figure out where Roundup Drive was. But once I put all that together, I realized that these folks are just misinterpreting what they have happening and what's going on. And I think we all took a hit to credibility, and that ideally, you know, I don't know, this email didn't come in until later, so it would have been difficult for planning board folks to catch this. But if staff and Nick, your guys' folks are hearing these concerns coming from these folks, I think this would have been a much better response and explanation for them. And I know it's frustrating to deal with this over and over and over again, and to be called a liar. Like, I get that. But to me, this is a much clearer explanation and trying to point out, listen, this document right here, you're missing the part where it says the west side of your properties, not the east. And that's where my frustration really stemmed from, is just realizing that we could have really addressed this concern of theirs in a little more clear, concrete fashion, without maybe as much frustration as was warranted, don't get me wrong, at being called a liar. And the story of the folks and the ditch and all that, I think we would have had a lot more credibility to stand on than like what we ended up doing. Because I don't necessarily I don't regret my vote on that. Like, I think that development is necessary, and everything I stand by is what I said at that hearing. But I also have some real just desire to do this better next time, so those folks don't walk away feeling so slighted, because we didn't correct what their misrepresentation was. And I feel like that was a failing on all of our parts, when I think we could have, like, we had it here. And I think staff and folks could have seen that those concerns were coming in before the meeting. And so that's where I'm coming from with my frustration, is like, I feel like we could have done a better job.
Yeah, Sean, I hear what you're saying. Recalling that very long evening a few weeks ago, it is one of these things when information and questions are coming in real time. It does make it challenging sometimes to address issues fully. It's interesting to think that, in some ways, there's a wisdom to spreading out complicated deliberations over multiple meetings, maybe for that reason. But I think, yeah, I mean, I really appreciate, Nick, you addressing this question head on here. I can't recall what the answers were. I mean, I know this came up at the meeting a few weeks ago, and I think planning board members, relayed the concern from members of the public to staff and to Nick. But I think planning board members, we should know that if there's ever a point where we don't think we can make a recommendation on, or not ready to make a recommendation, you can make a motion to table a decision at any point, and that's always available to us. Other than that, I think we're often in the situation where we're asked to make a decision with the information we have at hand. So I guess a couple of hands here raised. I will just the last thing I have to say on this is, the big picture here, it highlights the significance of rezoning requests. Since my time on the planning board, we've seen lots and lots of rezones, and they become commonplace. But I think the concerns of the neighbors here really highlight the fact that some people, when they purchase land, have an expectation that the zoning that was in place at that time is what they expect to move forward, notwithstanding changes that are made. As Nick presented here, things change over time, and zoning is requested to be changed, and that's a big deal when it happens. And neighbors have to be involved if they disagree or agree with the zoning change, and planning board members and city councilors have to recognize the significance of zoning changes. So, all right, I did not see the order in which hands were raised here, but I'll let Karen and Mary, if you guys could go first, and then we'll go to Stephanie and Neva.
I think I'll probably defer to Mary just because it's a city project.
Okay.
What I'm gonna say.
Just to remind you that the rezoning and subdivision go hand in hand. The subdivision couldn't have been approved without the rezone, and there are statutory deadlines that have to be met. So on that particular project, you really needed to make a recommendation or forward it on to council without a recommendation if you couldn't come to a vote and make a motion on it. So sometimes there will be projects like subdivisions that have deadlines in state law, and it won't really allow you to hold it over for another meeting. You will just forward it on with that recommendation and with some discussion if you need to.
Thanks for that clarification, Mary. I mean, I'm not sure if it's any, consolation to planning board members or to you, Sean, but the fact that, when we see an item at the planning board, it's not the end of the story by any means. It's really just the beginning. So, this item in particular is going through a whole process of meetings with city council in which these issues can be, brought forth. So I think overall the process is going to work at the end of the day. So, Karen, did you want to add to that at all? Or
I guess the only thing I would add, I mean, it was a city project, so I wasn't paying attention to the details of the conversation. But when you receive public comment, staff won't respond proactively necessarily to all of what you receive. We do rely on you to filter out what's important to follow up on and have additional clarification. So if there's something where you're just like, I don't get it, I need staff to, and you may not know until after the fact what you need clarification on. But if in the meeting there's something that you're stuck on, we won't necessarily pick up what you're interested in. Same with the developers rep. We'll wait for you to identify those things that you need us to provide feedback, comment, answer questions. We won't respond to every comment that you receive necessarily. There will be times if there's something specific that we hear that we need to straighten out the record on, we might proactively respond. But most of the time, we will rely on you to identify those things that you need further clarification or an answer to.
Oh, that's very good to know. Thank you, Karen. Because I kind of assumed that with the process, you guys were also like looking at these comments and maybe had more of an opportunity to be like, oh, this could be addressed with this. I didn't realize that was like the order of things.
Yeah, we do filter. I mean, we go through the comments. We certainly go through and analyze them, but we probably are doing it differently than you are. So things that might capture your attention, don't assume that they capture staff or the developers rep in the same way.
Okay. Oh, that okay. All right.
yeah, that's a really important point, Karen. Thanks for making that. Yeah, and so, I mean, just to reiterate slightly, I mean, for planning board members that aren't aware, I mean, the public comment is given to us. And so I think you'll see some of us often, taking a comment from a member of the public and giving it back to staff. And that's the way it has to happen. So you can keep that in mind in the future, or that's the way it's intended to happen. Stephanie, and then Neva, then Peter.
Sure. I guess ultimately, I just would love to reiterate Peter's really insightful comment about some more resources for planning board members to know what our legal standing is. One thing I appreciated a lot about when John Newman was on the board was having that lawyer's perspective of reminding us, hey, we're looking at a zoning, so this is what we're looking at, or we're looking at a subdivision, and so these are the things we can consider. And honestly, just in the interest of keeping our planning board meetings somewhat shorter, I would love to see us focus our discussions a little bit more around the things that we are actually legally considering and our role in that. And I don't feel like I have the knowledge of that. Karen, I loved what you said. I was soaking it up and I've already forgotten it all because I'm a person who needs to read something before I can fully understand it. So, you know, maybe there's already some of those materials that exist already. But I would love to know more about what our role as the planning board and our legal role in these decisions is. And then also, like, I didn't even like catch those comments, Sean, from the public, because my understanding was that this was a communication that was communicated between some folks in 2005 and wasn't a legal thing that we needed to be worried about. And I was thinking more about the Mullen area growth policy, or growth plan, which is happening out there, which is hopefully going to be even more dense in those areas. And so there's a lot happening in that area. And I would love some more guidance on which of those things are things that we really need to consider, and which of those things should we be sorting through and sifting through, and just some more guidance on those kind of things would be helpful.
Okay, we can see if we can help with that.
Viva.
So much has happened since I raised my hand. But I remember, so here's a reflection of my age, and Karen and Nick and Mary were all there then too. You know, when 44 Ranch subdivision was put into place, and you know, looking at that from 2020 and where we are with the Mullen area plan, you know, regardless of what was said 15 years ago, if we're going to lose this land, well, it's not even lose it. We're not going to lose it. We're going to turn it into housing and neighborhood centers and community farms and community gardens. But if you look at the whole area, I mean, 44 Ranch is just sort of a piece of it, right? And, you know, I fought 44 Ranch all those years ago. It's all prime farmland. And, you know, a part of me says, like, I want to make, just like I said last time, if we're going to develop this land, let's just do it as densely and creatively and, you know, as possible in these communities. And so honestly, I can't really look back at 2005. And I'm more interested in how do we make Heron's Landing and Remington Flats and whatever that big apartment complex that's coming our way fit into the Mullen plan. Like we have such an opportunity. And anyway, I'm sorry. I don't want to keep us any later than possible, or than impossible. I'm going to keep you as late as possible. No, but I don't want to keep us so late, but I just wanted to say that we got to look at this whole area, you know, as a whole, I think. And that's what the Mullen area planning thing gives us an opportunity to do. And so I don't really care what, you know, what, I'm not that I don't care, but what people who were promised 15 years ago in a subdivision in the middle of prime farmland, you know, it's not a high priority for me, but maybe I'm overstepping, but I'm going to vote in support, or no, we already voted in support of this, but this is the conversation. I'll stop now.
Thanks, Neva. Peter and then Sean.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry to, I don't want to start us on a whole new conversation, but I'm going to change the subject. One of the things that we had the subcommittee for affordable or low-income affordable housing incentives, whatever we wanted. I think we called it the incentive committee. And when Karen and I talked about this back in July, maybe it was July, we agreed because of COVID and the backlog at the city planning offices that we would postpone having more serious conversations and updates about where the city is and was in affordable housing until the fall. So I would like to have us discuss how we want to be involved in the discussions about affordable housing in the city. At one of the, either in September and October. I leave that up to other people who know our schedule better and when it makes some sense for us to have conversations about this. But not only do we need to know what the city and the county are doing, but we need to know when and if we can have any role in these conversations.
Thanks, Peter. And yeah, I mean, to the extent that I work with staff on the agenda, which is a very small extent, I'll try to make sure to remember to ask them to include an update on this in the future. I think it's a great idea.
Thanks.
And yeah, at any point in the future, I mean, if we need to feel the need to reconvene a subcommittee, we could do that. It doesn't seem like that's the right move right now, but it might be something that's coalescing. So
I agree.
Thanks for keeping that on the forefront, Peter. Karen, did you want to respond to that all? I don't know if you heard Peter's comment.
Yeah, I think I've been in contact with the city's affordable housing folks, and I think we can probably get something arranged in the next month or two. Probably not September, it'd probably have to be October, the way things are running right now with your schedule. But we can see what we can pull together. The county has an affordable housing study and position in the budget for this year, and it looks like that may be funded. Watch the budget hearing, I guess, on Thursday, and you'll know for sure. So the city's study would be or the county's study would be to do something complementary, figure out what the complementary program is for the county. The city obviously has a major role in this, but the county has a different geographic area and some different issues. And so figuring out how the county can best work with the city, and then what additional areas that we need to explore for places like Sealy Lake and Lolo and other more rural areas. And having a position funded with that to help oversee the study and carry it out. So there's some interesting stuff going on, and I know the city's got some stuff in the works, and we can work on bringing that to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that sounds great, Karen. Thank you. Sean?
Thanks, Vince. And this is brief. I just wanted to thank everybody for hashing through this. Part for me, I feel like I was able to vent, put out my frustrations and learn, I think more importantly, better questions that I can ask during the meeting to maybe address this. I feel like as an individual, I tend to really listen to the public comments and want to address those as thoroughly as possible. And, through this conversation, I've been able to learn, I think, how I can ask better questions next time, rather than being so vague, which is kind of what ended up happening at the last meeting. So I appreciate Nick staying around, and I appreciate Karen's comments, and everybody just kind of hanging through this conversation.
Great. Thanks for bringing this up, Sean, and explaining yourself. I think, does anyone else have any other comments? There's some hands raised, but I can't tell if they are current or old. Stephanie, Peter? No? Okay. Great. Well, with that, thank you everyone for another great and lengthy meeting, and especially to staff and to Nick for sticking around with us. Great. Have a nice night.
Thanks, everybody. Good job.